Section 13 of On the Nature of Things. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. Translated by John Selby Watson. Section 13, Book 5, Part 1. Who is able with mighty genius to compose a strain worthy of the majesty of things, and of these discoveries of Epicurus? Or who has such power over words that he can compose eulogies proportionate to the merits of him who has left us such blessings, obtained and acquired by his own intellect? No one, as I think, formed of a mortal body will ever be able. For if we ought to speak as the known dignity of the subjects which he expounded requires, he was a god. A god, I say, O illustrious Memmius, who first discovered that discipline of life which is now called wisdom, and who by the science of philosophy placed human existence, from amid so great waves of trouble and so great darkness of the mind, in so tranquil a condition and so clear a light. For compare with his investigations the ancient discoveries of others which are called divine. As Ceres is said to have pointed out corn to mortals, and Bacchus the liquid of wine produced from the grape, though life nevertheless might have continued without these gifts, as it is reported that some nations even now live without them. But men could not have lived well and happily without a pure and undisturbed breast, for which reason he, from whom the sweet consolations of existence, now spread abroad through mighty nations, calm the minds of men, seems to us the more justly to be accounted a god. But if you shall imagine that the deeds of Hercules excel his, you will be carried far away from sound reasoning. For what harm would those vast jaws of the Nemean lion and the bristly Arcadian boar do to us at present? Or what injury could the bull of Crete and the hydra, the pest of Lerna, defended with poisoned snakes, inflict on us at this time? Or how could the triple-breasted strength of the threefold Geryon hurt us? And how could the horses of Diomed, breathing fire from their nostrils, dwelling near Thrace and the Bistonian regions and Ismarus? Or how could the Arcadian birds, formidable with their hooked talons, inhabiting the lake Stymphalus, have so much annoyed us that we should think much of their destruction? Or how, I pray, would the fierce serpent, with his stern looks and huge body, that watched as he encircled the stem of a tree the shining golden apples of the Hesperides, have interfered with our comfort, when he lived near the shore of the ocean and the rough waters of the sea, whither neither any countryman of ours goes, nor any barbarian dares to approach? How, I ask, would other monsters of this kind which have been killed hurt us if they had not been conquered and were now alive? Not at all, as I am of opinion. For thus even now the earth is abundantly overrun with wild beasts, and filled with alarming terror throughout the groves and vast mountains and deep woods. But these are places which we, for the most part, have power to avoid. But unless the mind is purified, what contests and dangers must we incur in spite of our utmost efforts? How many bitter cares arising from lust tear the man distracted by them, and how many consequent terrors? Or what ills do pride, uncleanness, wantonness produce? How great calamities do they cause? And what evils do luxury and sloth generate? Will it not be fit, then, that we should deem this man, who subdued all these evils and expelled them from the mind, not with arms, but with words, worthy to be ranked in the number of the gods? Especially when he was accustomed to give precepts, both numerous and divinely expressed, concerning the immortal gods themselves, and to set forth in his instructions the whole nature of things. This is he on whose track I have entered, whilst I pursue his system of philosophy, and show in these expositions how necessarily all things individually continue their existence according to that law by which they were produced, and how impotent they are to break the strong conditions of time and destiny. In which class of things, produced and limited in existence, the substance of the mind above all has been found to be, and has been demonstrated to be formed of a generated consistence at first, and to be unable to endure uninjured through vast eternity. But I have also made it plain that when we seem to behold him in our sleep, whom life has left, mere images are accustomed to deceive the mind. For what remains, the course of my subject has now brought me to the point at which I have to demonstrate that the world consists of dissoluble matter, and that it had also a beginning, and to show by what means the combination of matter established the earth, the heaven, the sea, the stars, the sun, and the globe of the moon, and what living creatures sprung from the earth, and what, though believed to have existed, have at no period been produced. I have also to tell how the human race, with various speech, began to hold intercommunication by means of names of things, and by what process that oppressive fear of the gods entered the breasts of men, a fear which maintains throughout the world sacred temples, lakes, groves, altars, and images of the divinities. I shall besides explain by what force ruling nature guides the courses of the sun and the paths of the moon, lest perchance we should think that these bodies pursue eternal revolutions unrestrained and of themselves, in order to promote the growth of fruits and living creatures, and lest we should suppose that they are guided by any plan of the gods. For if those who have fairly understood that the gods pass a life free from care, nevertheless wonder meanwhile how things can severally be carried on, especially in those matters which are seen in the ethereal regions over our heads, they are carried back again to their old notions of religion, and set over themselves cruel tyrants whom they unhappily believe able to do all things, being themselves ignorant what can and what cannot be done, and by what means limited power and a deeply fixed boundary are assigned to every thing. To proceed then, and to delay you no longer with promises, contemplate in the first place the sea and the earth and the heaven, the triple nature of which, dear Memmius, three bodies, three forms so dissimilar, three substances of such a different consistence, one day will consign to destruction, and the mass and fabric of the world, sustained through so many years, shall sink into total dissolution. Nor does it escape my consideration how new and wonderful a subject it is for your reflection, that there will be an end to the heaven and the earth, and how difficult it is for me to convince you of this with arguments, as it generally happens indeed when you offer to the ear a subject hitherto strange to it, and yet cannot submit it to the sight of the eye, or put it into the hand, the avenues through which the nearest main road of belief leads into the human breast and the regions of the mind. But yet I will express my thoughts. Fact itself perhaps will bring credit to my words, and you will see, perchance, all things violently shaken in a brief space of time with rising convulsions of the earth, which time may fortune with commanding power avert far from us, and may reason rather than reality convince us that all things, overcome by the influence of time, may sink with a direfully sounding crash into destruction. On this subject, before I begin to utter oracles, expressed with more sincerity and with much more true reason than those of the Pythian priestess who speaks from the tripod and laurel of Apollo, I will set forth to you many consolations in learned and philosophic arguments, lest perchance, being restrained by religion, you should suppose that the earth, the sun, the heavens, the stars, and the moon, being endowed with a divine nature, must pursue their courses eternally, and lest you should conceive in consequence that it is just for all those, after the manner of the giants, to suffer punishment for their monstrous wickedness, who by their reasoning would shake the walls of the world, and seek to quench the radiant sun in the heavens, animadverting in mortal speech on bodies which are called immortal, but which in reality are so far distant from divine power, and are so unworthy to appear in the number of the gods, that they may rather be thought adapted to give us a notion of that which is altogether removed from vital motion and sense. For it is not possible that the nature and rationality of intellect should be thought capable of existing in all kinds of bodies whatsoever. As a tree cannot exist in the sky, nor clouds in the salt sea, nor can fish live in the fields, nor blood be in wood, nor liquid in stones, so it is fixed and appointed where everything may grow and subsist. Thus the nature of the mind cannot spring up alone without the body, or exist apart from the nerves and the blood. Whereas, if this could happen, the faculty of the human soul might rather arise in the head, or shoulders, or in the bottom of the heels, and might rather indeed be accustomed to grow in any place than to remain in the same man in the same receptacle of the man. But since it seems certain and fixed even in our own body in what part the soul and the mind may subsist and grow up by themselves, it is so much the rather to be denied that they can exist out of the entire body and without an animal form, whether in the soft clods of earth, or in the fire of the sun, or in the water, or in the lofty regions of the air. The heavenly bodies, therefore, since they cannot be animated with life, are not endowed with a divine sense. It is not possible, moreover, that you should believe there are sacred seats of the gods in any quarters of our world, for the nature and substance of the gods, being subtle and far removed from our senses, is scarcely apprehended by the power of our mind. And since it has hitherto escaped the touch and impact of our hands, it can assuredly touch nothing that is tangible by us, for nothing can touch another body if it is not possible for itself to be touched. For which reason the abodes of the gods also must be dissimilar to our abodes, as being subtle and correspondent to their own nature. These points I shall hereafter prove to you with abundance of argument. To say, moreover, that the gods designed to arrange all this noble fabric of the world for the sake of men, and therefore that we ought to extol it as an honorable achievement of the deities, and to believe that it will certainly be eternal and imperishable, and to affirm that it is unlawful ever to disturb from its seat by any force of argument that which was established for the human race by ancient contrivance and for perpetual duration, or to shake and displace, though only in words, the sum of things from their basis, and to feign and add other conceits of this sort, dear Memmius, is to be guilty of the utmost folly. For what profit can our gratitude afford to those who are immortal and blessed in themselves, that they should labor to effect anything for our sake? Or what new incitement could induce those who were before tranquil to desire, so long afterwards, to change their former mode of life? For it would seem that he only whom old things offend ought to delight in the things that are new. But in him to whom no trouble has happened in past time, when he spent life happily, what could excite the desire of novelty? Or, forsooth, the life of the gods was oppressed with gloom and sorrow until the genial birth of terrestrial things shone forth? Or again, what evil would it have been to us never to have been born? For whoever is born must certainly wish to remain in life as long as any alluring pleasure shall engage him, but to him who never tasted the love of life, nor was ever in the number of living beings, what affliction is it not to have been born? Moreover, whence was a model or idea for making things, and whence was the notion of men themselves implanted in the gods at first, that they should know and conceive in their mind what they should seek to do? Or by what means was the power of primary particles known, and what they could effect by their change of order and place, if nature herself did not give the first specimens of production? For the primordial atoms of things were driven in so many ways, by so many impulses, through an infinite duration of time, and were accustomed so to be borne and carried forward by their own weight, and to meet in all modes, and to try all endeavors as if to ascertain what their combinations might generate, that it is not surprising if they fell at last into such positions and acquired such motions as those by which this universe of things, through perpetual renovation, is now carried on. But if I were even ignorant what the primary elements of things are, yet this I could venture to assert from the scheme of the heaven itself, and to support it from many other reasons, that the system of things was by no means prepared for us by divine power, so great is the faultiness with which it stands affected. In the first place, of all that space which the rapid circumvolution of the heaven covers, mountains and woods, the abodes of wild beasts, have occupied a vast portion. Rocks and great marshes, and the sea, which widely separates the coasts of countries, cover another vast portion. Moreover, burning heat and the constant descent of frost deprive mortals of almost 2/3 of what is left. And as to the land which yet remains, nature would still by her own operation cover it with thorns, if human strength did not prevent, which, for the sake of the living, is accustomed to groan under the stout mattock, and to cut the earth with ploughs urged through it. For unless we, turning up the fertile clods with the ploughshare and forcing the soil, excite it to send forth its productions, they would be unable of themselves to rise into the liquid air. And yet at times, when all things procured with so great labor are green and flourish over the earth, either the sun in the heavens burns them up with violent heat, or sudden showers and cold frosts destroy them, or blasts of wind with violent hurricanes tear them to pieces. Besides, why does nature cherish and increase by land and by sea a terrible brood of wild beasts and monsters hostile to the human race? Why do the seasons of the year bring diseases? Why does untimely death wander abroad? Moreover, an infant, as soon as nature with great efforts has sent it forth from the womb of its mother into the regions of light, lies like a sailor cast out from the waves, in want of every kind of vital support, and fills the parts around with mournful wailings, as is natural for one by whom so much evil in life remains to be undergone. But the various sorts of cattle, herds, and wild beasts grow up with ease. They have no need of rattles or other toys, nor is the fond and broken voice of the nurse necessary to be used to one of them. Nor do they require different dresses according to the season of the year, nor, besides, have they any need of arms or high walls with which they may defend their property, since the earth herself and nature, the artificer of things, produce all supplies for all, in abundance. Above all, since the body of the earth and the water and the light breezes of the winds and the warm heat, of which this sum of things seems to be constituted, consists wholly of generated and dissoluble substance, the whole frame of the world must be considered to be of similar nature. For of whatever creatures in mortal shapes we see the parts and members to be of a generated consistence, we observe in general these same creatures to be themselves both generated and mortal. For which reason, when I see the 4 elements, the vast members and divisions of the world, wasted and reproduced, I may conclude that there was also a time when the heaven and earth had a beginning, and that there will be a time for their destruction. On these points, do not imagine, my Memmius, that I have assumed anything too hastily, in supposing earth and fire to be perishable, in not doubting that water and air waste away, and in saying that the same elements are again produced and augmented. In the first place, some part of the earth, parched with the constant heat of the sun and trampled with the perpetual action of feet, exhales mists and flying clouds of dust, which strong winds disperse through the whole air. Part also of the clods is washed off by showers, while rivers, as they strike against their banks, wear them away. Besides, whatever body increases another is on its own part diminished. And since the earth, which is the parent of all things, seems without doubt to be the common sepulchre of all things, the earth therefore, you may be assured, is wasted and is recruited and grows again. Further, there is no need of words to show that the sea, rivers, and fountains abound with new liquid, and that waters flow incessantly into the ocean, for the vast deflux of streams from all sides declares it. But we must observe above all things that a certain portion of the water is carried off, and that it happens at last that there is no superabundance of water. For first that part is removed which the strong winds, sweeping the ocean, and the ethereal sun dispelling it with his rays, subtract from its surface, and next that part which is distributed through all the earth underneath, for the salt is strained off in its passage through the ground, and the substance of the water flows back, and all meets here and there at the sources of rivers, whence it flows in a fresh stream over the earth, wherever a passage, once cut, has borne along the waters in their liquid course. I shall now therefore observe concerning the air that it is changed every hour in innumerable ways. For whatever is perpetually passing off from bodies is all carried into the vast ocean of air, and unless it were to restore particles back to those bodies, and to recruit them as their substance passes away, all things would by this time have been dissolved and converted into air. It accordingly does not cease to be perpetually generated from bodies, and perpetually to return back to bodies, since it is agreed that all things are in constant flux. The ethereal sun, too, the great fountain of liquid light, floods the heaven perpetually with new brightness, and instantly supplies with a new ray the place of the ray that has passed off. For whatever brightness it first sends forth is, wherever it falls, lost to it. This you may collect from hence, that as soon as clouds have begun to come over the sun, and, as it were, to break through the rays of light, all the lower part of these rays is immediately lost, and the earth, wherever the clouds pass, is overshadowed. So that you may understand that things constantly require a fresh supply of light, and that every first emission of radiance is dispersed, nor could objects otherwise be seen in the sunshine unless the fountain of light itself furnished a perpetual supply. Even your nocturnal torches, which are things of earth, your hanging lamps and tapers brilliant with waving flames, and showing themselves fat with abundance of smoke, are impelled in a similar manner by the agency of heat to emit new radiance. They incessantly discharge their tremulous rays. They never cease, nor does the light, as if broken off, leave the place dark. So swiftly is the destruction of that flame hastened from all its rays through the rapid origination and emission of new particles. Thus too we must suppose that the sun and moon and stars throw off their light through successive generations of beams, and perpetually lose whatever rays are first to pass from them, so that you must not by any means suppose that these bodies maintain imperishable vigor. Do you not see, moreover, that even stones are overcome by time? Do you not observe that lofty towers fall, and that rocks decay? Do you not notice that the temples and images of the gods, overcome with age, open in fissures, and that the sacred deities themselves cannot extend the limits of fate, or struggle against the laws of nature? Besides, do we not see that the monuments of heroes fall? You might even believe that they desire for themselves a time to grow old. Do we not observe that flints crumble from the lofty mountains, and cannot endure and withstand the powerful force of even a finite age? For if they were bodies which through infinite ages had sustained all the assaults of time, and continued exempt from dissolution, they would not now suddenly be broken away and fall to pieces. Further, contemplate this heaven around and above us, which contains all the earth in its embrace. It produces, as some say, all things from itself, and receives all things when dissolved into itself. But it was a generated body, and consists wholly of perishable substance. For whatever increases and nourishes other things from itself must by that means be diminished, and must be recruited by receiving into itself fresh substances. In addition, if there was no origin of the heavens and earth from generation, and if they existed from all eternity, how is it that other poets, before the time of the Theban war and the destruction of Troy, have not also sung of other exploits of the inhabitants of earth? How have the actions of so many men thus from time to time fallen into oblivion? How is it that they nowhere survive in remembrance, and are nowhere stamped on everlasting monuments of fame? But, as I am of opinion, the whole of the world is of comparatively modern date and recent in its origin, and had its beginning but a short time ago. From which cause also, some arts are but now being refined, and are even at present on the increase. Many improvements are in this age added to ships. Musicians have but recently produced melodious sounds. This nature and system of the world, too, of which I write, has been but lately discovered, and I myself, among the first discoverers, have been found the first poet that could express it in the language of my country. But if perchance you suppose that all these arts formerly existed the same as at present, but that generations of men have perished by burning fire, or that cities have fallen by some great catastrophe of the world, or that violent rivers through continual rains have inundated the earth and overwhelmed cities, you must so much the more, being convinced by these facts, admit that there will probably be also a destruction of the earth and the heaven. For since things were affected and shaken by so great disorders and so great dangers, if a more serious cause had then pressed upon them, they might universally have suffered destruction and mighty ruin. Nor do we who now live appear to be mortal, one like another, by any other inference than that we sicken with diseases, similarly to those whom nature has removed from life. Further, whatsoever bodies remain eternal must either, as being of a solid consistence, repel assaults and suffer nothing to penetrate them that can disunite their compact parts within, such as are the primary particles of matter, the nature of which we have already shown, or they must be able to endure throughout all time because they are exempt from assaults or unsusceptible of them, as is a vacuum, which remains intangible and suffers nothing from impact. Or they must be indestructible for this reason, that there is no sufficiency of space round about into which substances may, as it were, separate and be dissolved, as the entire universe is eternal, inasmuch as there is neither any space without it into which its parts may disperse, nor are there any bodies which may fall upon it and break it to pieces by violent concussion. But, as I have demonstrated, neither is the nature of this world of a solid consistence, since in all compound bodies vacuity is mixed, nor is it like vacuity itself, nor again are bodies wanting which, rising fortuitously from the infinite of space, may overthrow the sum of things with a violent tempest, or bring upon it some other kind, whatever it may be, of disaster and danger. Nor, moreover, is vastness and profundity of space wanting into which the walls of the world may be scattered, or, assaulted by some other kind of force, may be dissolved. The gate of death, therefore, is not closed to the heaven, or to the sun, or to the earth, or to the deep waters of the sea, but stands open, and looks back for them with a mighty and huge abyss. For which reason, since these existing things are dissoluble, you must necessarily allow that they are generated of indissoluble elements. For bodies which are of mortal consistence could not have been able from all eternity to contemn till now the strong assaults of infinite time. Furthermore, since the great divisions of the world are perpetually contending, and are stirred up in implacable warfare against each other, do you not see that some end to their long contest may be assigned? And this end may take place either when the sun and heat in general, having drunk up all the moisture, shall have become supreme, a consummation indeed which they endeavor to effect, but cannot yet accomplish their designs, so much do rivers supply, and so constantly do the waters threaten even of their own power to deluge all things from the deep gulf of the ocean. But their threats are vain, for winds sweeping the floods, and the ethereal sun dispelling them with his rays, diminish their bulk, and seem to trust that they can dry up all things before the waters can attain the completion of their design. Maintaining so great a war, they persist to strive with one another for their great objects, and to contend, as it seems, with equal efforts, though, as is reported, fire was once superior on the earth, and water once reigned triumphant over the plains. For fire prevailed, and burnt and consumed many parts, when the erring and impetuous fury of the sun's horses hurried Phaethon through the whole heaven and over the entire earth. But the omnipotent Father, incensed with fierce rage, hurled Phaethon from his chariot to the earth by the sudden stroke of a thunderbolt. And the sun, meeting him as he fell, caught up the eternal lamp of the world, brought back his scattered horses, and yoked them trembling to the car, and guiding them in their own path restored and reorganized all things. This, you must be aware, is the story which the poets of the Greeks sung, but which is too far removed from truth and reason. For fire may have the superiority, when more atoms than usual of igneous matter have collected from the infinite of space, but afterwards its strength, being by some means repressed, necessarily subsides, else all things, burned up by a scorching atmosphere, would utterly perish. Once, too, as tradition tells, water, having risen in a body, began to have the mastery, at which period it overwhelmed numbers of mankind with its waves. But subsequently, when its strength, which had risen from the infinite profound, was in some way turned aside and repelled, the rains came to a stand, and the rivers diminished their violence. End of section 13.
Section 14 of On the Nature of Things. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mark Harrington. On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. Translated by John Selby Watson. Book 5, Part 2. But I shall now proceed to relate in due course how the combination of matter established the heaven and the earth, the depths of the seas, and the revolutions of the sun and moon. For assuredly neither the primary elements of things dispose themselves severally in their own order by wisdom or counsel arising from a sagacious understanding, nor certainly did they argue among themselves what motions each should produce, but because the primordial atoms of the world, being many, were agitated by concussions, in many ways, through an infinite space of time, and were accustomed to be carried forward by their own weights, and to combine in all modes, and to try all efforts, as if to ascertain whichsoever of them, meeting together, might give birth to some offspring, it from this cause happens that, being spread abroad during a vast period of duration, and attempting all kinds of combinations and movements, those at length came together, which, having suddenly coalesced, became at first, and become now, from time to time, the commencements of great productions, the origin of the earth, the sea, and the heaven, and of every kind of living creatures. Here at that time could be seen neither the chariot of the sun, flying on high with its abundant light, nor the stars of the great firmament, nor the sea, nor the heaven, nor the earth, nor the air, nor could anything be discerned similar to our present objects, but only a certain crude agitation of matter, and a congeries swelling up together. Afterwards the parts began to separate, and similar things began to be united with similar, and to evolve the world, and display its parts, and arrange in different members, which were generated from all kinds of primordial atoms, whose intervals, courses, connections, weights, impulses, combinations, and motions, discord, exciting war amongst them, from the disagreement of their forms and the variety of their shapes, had disturbed, on which account they could not remain all so united, or produce such suitable motions among themselves as should lead to the objects which they were to effect, that is, to divide the high heaven from the earth, and to cause that the sea and other water should spread abroad separately, and that the stars of heaven should shine by themselves pure and distinct. For in the first place, the several atoms of earth, because they were heavy, and involved one with another, met all together in the middle, and took, as it were, the lowest place, which atoms, the more closely they cohered, the more effectually they excluded from themselves those particles which were to form the sea, the stars, the sun, and the moon, and the walls of this great world. For all these latter parts of nature consist of more smooth and round particles, and of atoms much more diminutive than the earth, and, accordingly, the fiery ether, bursting forth from the several parts, through the small pores of the earth, first raised itself on high, and being light, carried with it much fire, by a process similar to what we often witness, when, in the morning, the golden rays of the beaming sun first blush over the grass gemmed with dew, and when the stagnant lakes and ever-flowing rivers exhale a mist, and earth itself sometimes appears to smoke, all which vapors, when they are united in the height above us, cover the heaven in an apparently condensed body. So too, at that time, the light and expanded ether, diffused around in a united mass, collected itself, and thus, being widely extended in every direction, enclosed all other things in its vast embrace. To this formation of the ether succeeded the rise of the sun and moon, and of those bodies whose orbs revolve in the air between both, bodies which neither the earth nor the vast ether attracted to itself, because they were neither so heavy as to sink down to the earth, nor so light as to glide in the highest regions, and yet they so exist between both, that they revolve as active bodies, and are a part of the entire world. As in our own bodies, some members may remain at rest, while others are still in motion. These substances, therefore, being withdrawn, the earth, where the vast blue region of the sea now spreads, suddenly sunk down, and hollowed out depths by means of the salt flood, and in proportion as, day after day, the surrounding tide of air and the warm rays of the sun urged the earth, lying exposed even to its extreme bounds, with frequent impulses. Those substances, therefore, being withdrawn, the earth, where the vast blue region of the sea now spreads, suddenly sunk down, and hollowed out depths by means of the salt flood, and in proportion as, day after day, the surrounding tide of air and the warm rays of the sun urged the earth, lying exposed even to its extreme bounds, with frequent impulses, so that, being thus acted upon, it might collect in condensation towards its own center, so much the more the salt fluid, pressed out from its body, increased with its flood the sea and the liquid plains, and so much more the numerous particles of heat and air, escaping forth from other substances, flew upwards and formed, afar from the earth, the lofty and shining temples of the sky. The plains sunk down, and the slopes of the high mountains increased, for such inequality was inevitable, as the rocks could neither subside, nor could all parts of the ground settle to the same level. Thus, then, the heavy mass of the earth, with condensed bulk, stood firm, and all the heavy grossness of the world, as it were, collected to the bottom, and sunk down like the dregs into the deep. Then the sea, the air, and the fiery ether itself, which were of liquid consistence, were all left pure. And of these bodies some were lighter than others, and the ether, being of the greatest subtlety and levity, floats above the breezes of the air, nor allows its clear substance to mingle with the matters that disturb the aerial regions. It leaves all these lower parts to be swept with violent whirlwinds. It leaves them to be disturbed with tumultuous storms, whilst itself, gliding with settled impulse, bears along its own fires. For that the ether may revolve thus steadily, and with uniform tenor, the flood in the Euxine shows, which moves with a settled flux, preserving one unvaried direction in its course. Let us now state what is the cause of the motion of the stars. In the first place, if the great orb of heaven whirls round, we must admit that the air presses and urges the sky on either side, and confines it externally, and encloses it in each direction. Then that another body of air flows over our heads and tends in the same direction in which the bright stars of the eternal world roll, and that there is still other air beneath our feet, which carries along the heaven in the opposite direction, as we see running streams turn wheels and buckets. It is likewise possible that the whole heaven may remain stationary, though the bright constellations are nevertheless borne along, whether because active tides of ether are confined within the sky, and seeking an outlet, whirl themselves round, and roll with them the stars through the vast regions of heaven, or whether air, flowing from some quarter without, wheels and impels the stars, or whether they of themselves can move forward, whither the sustenance of each attracts and invites them, while pursuing their course, and recruiting their igneous substances everywhere throughout the heavens. For which of these causes prevails in this world, it is difficult to lay down as certain, but I demonstrate only what is possible, and may be effected throughout the universe, in various worlds, formed in various ways, and seek to assign several causes for the motions of the stars, which causes may operate in different parts through the whole of things, but of which one must necessarily be this very cause that produces motion in our stars, though to decide which of them it is by no means the part of a man proceeding like myself cautiously and step by step. And that the earth may rest in the middle part of the world, it is necessary that its weight should gradually, as it were, become evanescent and imperceptible, and that it should have another substance beneath it, united with it from its earliest age, and closely connected with the aerial parts of the world in which it was produced and continues to live. The earth is, therefore, no burden to the air, nor at all depresses it, just as his limbs are no burden to a man, and just as the head is no burden to the neck, nor do we feel the whole weight of the body press upon the feet. But whatever weights fall upon us and are laid upon us externally hurt or annoy us, although they are often far less than those which are within us. Of so great importance it is to understand what one thing can effect by union with another. The earth, accordingly, was not brought into this world suddenly as a foreign body, and cast from some other quarter upon air that was strange to it, but was produced together with the rest of the world, and as a regular part of it at its first origin, just as our members are seen to be formed with us. Besides, the earth, when shaken with violent thunder, immediately shakes all things which are above it with its motion, an effect which it could by no means produce unless it were combined with the aerial parts of the world, and with the heaven, for they cohere by common connections, one with the other, conjoined and coalescing in union from the earliest period. Do you not observe also how exquisitely subtle a substance of the soul sustains the body, which is of great weight, simply because it is so closely united and combined with it? What power, too, but that of the soul which governs the limbs can raise the body with a vigorous leap from the ground? Do you now understand how much force a subtle substance may have when it is united with a heavy body, as the air is joined with the earth, and the power of the soul with ourselves? Nor can the circumference of the sun be much greater, or its fire less, than it appears to our senses. For from whatever distances fires can throw their rays, and cast a warm heat upon our bodies, the ejection of the heat from those distances detracts nothing from the bulk of the igneous matter, and the fire is not all more contracted to the view. Since, therefore, the heat of the sun and its effused light reach to our senses, and the parts about us shine with its rays, the form and outline of the sun must, on this account, appear as it really is, so that you can add nothing more to it or make it less. And the moon, whether, as she glides through the sky, she illuminates its regions with a borrowed light, or whether she sends forth radiance from her own body, whichsoever is the case, she is, as she pursues her course, of no larger a dimension than she appears to our eyes as we observe her. For all objects which, being far remote from us, we view through a large body of air, look confused in their appearance, before their outline seems at all diminished. For which reason the moon, since it presents a clear shape and defined outline, as it does whenever its outmost edges are observed, must hence appear to us in the sky just as large as it is. Further, whatsoever stars in the heavens you view from hence can assuredly be only very little less, or only very little larger than they appear, since of whatsoever fires we see on the earth, even whilst the motion of their light is plain, and their glow is clearly perceived, the outline seems at times to vary in one way or another, contracting or expanding, according as it is more or less distant. It is not, moreover, a matter of wonder, how so small a body as the sun can emit so large a quantity of light, as to cover with its flood the seas, the whole earth, and the heavens, and to pervade all things with its quickening heat. Since it is possible that one fountain of the light of the whole world, opened from hence, may flow forth abundantly and scatter its radiance abroad, because the atoms of heat, we may suppose, so meet together here from all parts of the world, and their assemblage forms such a flood that all this heat may flow from one source. For do you not observe too how small a spring of water sometimes irrigates the meadows far and wide, and flows exuberantly over the fields? It is also possible that heat may pervade the air with a strong glow from no very great fire in the sun, if, perchance, the air be so tempered and disposed as to be excited to warmth, though affected with but gentle fervor. As we sometimes see fire from one spark spread in all directions among cornfields and straw. And perhaps the sun, shining on high with its rosy light, contains about it much heat in secret stores of fire, which, though it be distinguished by no brightness, yet, retaining a glow, increases the force of the rays to such a degree as we experience. Nor does the law of the sun's motion appear plain and evident, nor is it demonstrable how he passes from his summer regions to the wintry part of his course in Capricorn, and how, coming back from thence, he turns to the solstitial points. Nor do we understand how the moon seems to traverse that space in each month, in passing through which the sun occupies the period of a year. A plain reason, I say, has not been assigned for these phenomena. For, in the first place, that appears possible which the venerable opinion of the philosopher Democritus asserts, that the nearer each of the heavenly bodies is to the earth, the less swiftly can they be carried round by the revolution of the heaven, since the rapid and strong force of the upper sky decreases and loses its power beneath, and that, accordingly, the sun, with the lower constellations following it, is gradually left behind, because it is much beneath the fiery signs. Also that the moon, from this same cause, falls back so much the more, for the more distant its course, being lower, is from the heaven, and approaches to the earth, the less can it exert its swiftness with the signs. Since the more gentle is the speed with which the moon, being lower than the sun, is borne along, the more easily all the signs around overtake it and are carried past it. Hence it happens that the moon seems to return more quickly to each sign, because the signs return towards it. It is possible also that two currents of air at a certain season may blow in turns from opposite quarters of the world. of which currents one may be that which drives the sun from the summer signs into the winter part of his course, and into freezing cold, and the other may be that which sends him back from the freezing shades of cold into the warm regions and glowing constellations. And, in like manner, we may suppose that the moon and the stars, which revolve for long years in vast orbits, may move by means of two currents of air in opposite directions. Do you not notice also that clouds, by means of opposite winds, go in different ways, the lower contrary to the upper? And why, therefore, may not these heavenly bodies be borne through the vast circuits of the sky by currents opposed to each other? The reason why night covers the earth with its great darkness is either because the light grows weak when the sun, after his long course, has reached the extremity of the heaven, and has sent forth his fires languidly, as being exhausted with the journey, and wasted by passing through a long tract of air, or because the same force which carried the solar orb above the earth compels it to turn its course beneath the earth. Matuta also, the goddess of the morning, leads forth the rosy aurora, and spreads abroad the light at a certain hour, either because the same sun which was under the earth, returning again, aspires to the heaven, proceeding to enlighten it with his rays, or because at that particular time bodies of fire congregate, and many atoms of heat are accustomed to meet in confluence, which cause a new light of the sun to be perpetually produced. Thus it is said that from the lofty hills of Ida the rays of the sun, when his light rises in the east, are seen dispersed, and that they afterwards collect, as it were, into one body, and form a complete orb. Nor ought it, in such phenomena, to be a subject of wonder that these atoms of fire can thus flow together, and renew the splendor of the sun at a certain time. For we observe many other things which take place at a certain time in all departments of nature. The groves flourish at a certain time, and at a certain time drop their verdure. At a certain time also age directs the teeth to be shed, and causes the immature youth to bloom with soft down, and to let the flexible beard, too, descend from his cheeks. Lightnings, moreover, snow, rain, cloudy weather, and winds take place at seasons of the year by no means uncertain. For since the first commencement of causes thus arose, and the affairs of the world thus proceeded, as at present, from their earliest origin, every event is a consequence in the unvarying course of things. That the days also increase while the nights grow shorter, and that the days are diminished in length when the nights become augmented, may possibly happen, either because the same sun, revolving below and above the earth, divides the regions of the air with unequal curves, and distinguishes the orb of heaven into dissimilar parts, while, whatever it has taken from one part of it, it adds, as it revolves, just so much to the opposite part, until it has come to that sign in the heavens where the node of the year makes the darkness of night equal to the light of day. For the heaven has two separate points at equal distances, where the courses of the north wind and the south meet, owing to the position of the whole circle of the zodiac, in which the revolving sun consumes the period of the year, illumining the earth and the sky with oblique light, as the system of those declares who have observed that whole region of the heaven which is distinguished by the array of the 12 signs. Or, because the air is denser in certain parts, the tremulous rays of light are therefore retarded, and cannot easily penetrate it and emerge to the dawn, for which reason the nights in the winter delay long, until the bright herald of day returns, Or again, because at alternate seasons of the year, the atoms of flame, which cause the sun to rise in a particular part of the heavens at a particular time, are accustomed to congregate slower or faster. As for the moon, she may shine because she is struck with the rays of the sun, and may turn towards us every day a larger portion of light in her aspect, as she recedes farther from the sun's orb, until, being opposite to him, she has shone forth with fullest splendor, and, rising on high in the east, has beheld his setting in the west. Thence also, retiring backwards, she may, as it were, hide her light gradually as she approaches from the opposite side, along the circle of the zodiac, nearer to the sun's radiance, as those philosophers suppose who make the moon to be in shape like a ball, and to pursue her path of revolution beneath the sun, and hence it happens that they seem to say what is true. There is also a hypothesis by which the moon may revolve and present various phases of brightness with her own light. For it is possible that there may be another body which moves and advances together with her, and which in every way obstructs and hinders her light, but nevertheless cannot be seen, as it passes along in total darkness. And the moon may possibly revolve upon her axis, like a ball tinged with shining light only on one side, and may, by turning her orb, present to us her various phases. Thus, progressively, she turns that part which is illuminated, so as to behold us with a full aspect and open eye. Then, by degrees, she turns away and removes from us the brilliant side of her orb, as indeed the Babylonish doctrine of the Chaldeans taught, which, refuting the method of the Greek astrologers, labors to support this hypothesis in opposition to it, just as if that, for which each contends, might not be true, or as if there were any reason why you should choose to embrace one opinion less than the other. Further, when you see so many things produced in a certain order, it is difficult to demonstrate by reason, and to evince by argument, why a new moon may not be generated every day, with a certain succession of phases and figures, and each moon, as it diurnally arises, diurnally decay, and another be reproduced in its place and station. For the spring and Venus begin their course, and the winged Zephyr, the harbinger of spring, walks before, near whose footsteps maternal Flora, preparing the way, covers the whole path with richest flowers and perfumes. Next follows scorching summer, and dusty Ceres closely attendant on her, and the Etesian breezes of the northern winds. Then succeeds autumn, together with whom advances Bacchus. Then follow other weather and other winds, the loud resounding southeast, and the south fraught with thunder. At length cold brings on snows, and spreads abroad benumbing chillness, and winter comes after, and frost chattering with his teeth. Since, therefore, so many things may occur at a certain time, it is the less surprising if the moon is at a certain time produced, and at a certain time decays. As for the eclipses of the sun and occultations of the moon, you must suppose that they may arise from various causes. For, as you perhaps ask, why should the moon only be thought able to shut out the world from light, and to oppose her high head to it on the side of the earth, obtending her dark orb to the sun's glowing rays, and not some other body, which may always revolve devoid of light, be considered able to produce such an effect at the same time? And why also may not the sun at a certain time send forth his radiance languidly, and again renew his splendor, when, in his passage through the air, he has passed by certain places which, we may suppose, are hurtful to his beams, and which cause his fires to be suppressed and extinguished? And why should the earth have power, in its turn, to deprive the moon of light, and passing itself above to keep the sun shut out from her, while she passes monthly through the dense coniform shadow? And why should not some other body be able, at that time, to pass beneath the moon, or to glide over the orb of the sun, which body may intercept from her his effulgent rays and spreading light? And still, if the moon shines herself by her own brightness, why may she not grow dim in a certain part of the world while she passes through regions noxious to her light? For what remains, since I have shown how everything may occur in the blue sky of our vast world, in order that we might understand what power and causes might produce the varied course of the sun and the wanderings of the moon, and by what means they are accustomed to have their light obstructed and eclipsed, and to spread sudden darkness over the earth when they shut their eyes, as it were, for a time, and then, having opened them again, cover every fair region with shining light. I now return to the early age of the world and the tender fields of earth to consider what kind of productions they first ventured, with their new power of generation, to raise into the regions of light and to commit to uncertain winds. In the beginning, then, the earth spread over the hills the growth of herbs and the beauty of verdure, and the flowery fields throughout all regions shone with a green hue, and then was given to the various kinds of trees full power of shooting upwards through the air. For as feathers and hairs and bristles are first produced over the limbs of quadrupeds and the bodies of the winged tribes, so the new earth then first put forth herbs and trees, and afterwards generated the numerous races of animals, which arose in various forms and by various modes. For animals that were to live on the earth could assuredly neither have fallen from the sky, nor have come forth from the salt depths of the sea. It remains therefore to believe that the earth must justly have obtained the name of mother, since from the earth all living creatures were born. And even now many animals spring forth from the earth, which are generated by means of moisture and the quickening heat of the sun. It is accordingly less wonderful if, at the same time, creatures more numerous and of larger size arose, and came to maturity while the earth and the air were yet fresh and vigorous. First of all, the race of winged animals and the variegated birds left their eggs, being excluded in the season of spring, as grasshoppers in these days spontaneously leave their thin coats in the summer, proceeding to seek sustenance and life. Next, be assured, the earth produced for the first time the tribes of men and beasts, for much heat and moisture abounded through the plains, and hence, where any suitable region offered itself, a kind of wombs sprung up, adhering to the earth by fibers. These, when the age of the infants within them at the season of maturity had opened, escaping from their moist enclosure and seeking for air, nature, in those places, prepared the pores of the earth and forced it to pour from its open veins a liquid like milk, just as every woman at present, when she has brought forth, is stored with sweet milk, because all the strength of the food is directed to the breasts. Thus the earth afforded nourishment to the infants. The warmth rendered a garment unnecessary, and the grass supplied a couch, abounding with luxuriant and tender down. But the early age of the world gave forth neither severe cold nor extraordinary heat, nor winds of impetuous violence, for all these alike increase and acquire strength by time. For which cause, I say again and again, the earth has justly acquired and justly retains the name of mother, since she herself brought forth the race of men, and produced, at this certain time, almost every kind of animal which exults over the vast mountains, and the birds of the air, at the same period, with all their varied forms. but because she must necessarily have some termination to bearing, she ceased, like a woman, exhausted by length of time. For lapse of time changes the nature of the whole world, and one condition after another must succeed to all things, nor does any being continue always like itself. All is unsettled. Nature alters and impels everything to change. For one thing decays, and, grown weak through age, languishes. Another again grows up, and bursts forth from contempt. Thus age changes the nature of the whole world, and one condition after another falls upon the earth, so that what she could once bear she can no longer, while she can bear what she did not bear of old. The earth also in that age made efforts to produce various monsters that sprung up with wonderful faces and limbs, the hermaphrodite between both sexes, and not either, but removed from both. Others wanting feet, and others destitute of hands. Some also were found dumb for want of a mouth, and some blind, without even a face. And others again were shackled by the cohesion of their limbs over their whole bodies, so that they could neither do anything nor go in any direction, could neither avoid harm nor take what was necessary to preserve life. Other prodigies and portents of this kind she generated, but to no purpose, for nature abhorred and prevented their increase, nor could they reach the desired maturity of age, or find nutriment, or be united in the pleasures of love. For we see that many circumstances must concur with other circumstances in order that living creatures may be able to produce their kinds by propagation. First, it is necessary that there be food. Then, that there be genial semen throughout the organs, which may flow when the limbs are relaxed in union. And likewise, for the female to be united with the male, they must both have correspondent members, by which each may combine in mutual delight with the other. Many kinds of animal life, too, must then have perished, not having been able to continue their species by propagation. For whatever creatures you see breathing the vital air, assuredly either craft or courage, or at least activity, has preserved and defended their race from the commencement of its existence. And there are many which, from their usefulness to mankind, remain, as it were, entrusted to us, and committed to our guardianship. In the first place, courage has protected the fierce brood of lions and the savage races of other wild animals, and craft has secured the fox, as swiftness has saved the stag. But the light slumbering breed of dogs, with their faithful affections, and all the various species of horses, and the woolly flocks too, and horned cattle, all these, my dear Memmius, are committed to the protection of man. For they have anxiously avoided wild beasts, and have sought peace, and plenty of subsistence has been provided for them without labor of theirs, which subsistence we secure to them as a reward in return for their service. But of those to whom nature has given no such qualities, that they should either be able to live of themselves, or to afford us any service, why should we suffer the races to be maintained and protected by our support? Indeed, all these, rendered helpless by their own fatal bonds, were exposed as a prey and a prize to other animals, until nature brought their whole species to destruction. But centaurs and such creatures there neither were, nor ever can be, for there can never exist an animal formed of a double nature and of two bodies, an animal made up of such heterogeneous members that the power in the opposite portions of the frame cannot possibly be equal. This you may learn, with however dull an understanding, from the following observations. First, the horse, when 3 years of his age have passed, is flourishing in full vigor. The boy, at this time of life, is by no means so, but will even often seek in his sleep the milky teats of his mother's breast. Afterwards, when, in old age, his lusty vigor and stout limbs are failing the horse, growing torpid, as life is departing, behold, at that very period, the young man's age being in its flower, youth prevails in him, and clothes his cheeks with soft down, so that you cannot possibly imagine that centaurs can be composed or consist of a man and the servile seed of a horse, or that there can be scylli of half-marine bodies tinctured with fierce dogs, or other monsters of this sort, whose parts we observe to be incompatible with each other, parts which neither grow up together in their bodies, nor acquire vigor together, nor lose their strength together in old age, and which are neither excited by the same objects of affection, nor agree with the same tempers, nor find that the same kinds of food are nutritious to their bodies. For you may observe that bearded goats often grow fat on hemlock, which to men is rank poison. Since, too, the flame of fire is accustomed to scorch and burn up the tawny bodies of lions, as well as every kind of creature on earth that consists of flesh and blood, how was it possible that a chimera, one animal compounded of 3 bodies, the forepart a lion, the hinder a dragon, the middle a goat, could blow abroad at its mouth a fierce flame out of its body? For which reason, he who supposes that such animals might have been produced, even when the earth was new and the air fresh, leaning for argument only on this empty term of newness, may babble with equal reason many other hypotheses of a like nature. He may say that rivers of gold then flowed everywhere over the earth, and that the groves were accustomed to blossom with jewels, or that men were formed with such power and bulk of limbs that they could extend their steps over the deep seas and turn the whole heaven around them with their hands. For though, at the time when the earth first produced animal life, there were innumerable seeds of things in the ground, this is yet no proof that creatures could have been generated of mixed natures, and that heterogeneous members of animals could have been blended together, since the various kinds of herbs and fruits and rich groves, which even now spring up exuberantly from the earth, can nevertheless not be produced with a union of different kinds. But they can readily be produced if each proceeds in its own order, and all preserve their distinctions according to the fixed law of nature. End of section 14.
Section 15 of On the Nature of Things. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nathan at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. Translated by John Selby Watson. Section 15, Book 5, Part 3. And that early race of men upon the earth was much more hardy, as it was natural that they should be, for the hard earth herself bore them. They were internally sustained with bones both larger and more solid, and furnished with strong nerves throughout their bodies, nor were they a race that could easily be injured by heat or cold, or by change of food, or by any corporeal malady. And during many lustres of the sun, revolving through the heaven, they prolonged their lives after the roving manner of wild beasts. No one was either a driver of the crooked plough, or knew how to turn up the fields with the spade, or to plant young seedlings in the earth, or to cut with pruning hooks the old boughs from the lofty trees. That supply which the sun and rain had afforded, or which the earth had yielded of its own accord, sufficiently gratified their desires. They refreshed themselves, for the most part, among the acorn-laden oaks. The earth, too, then furnished abundance of whortleberries, even larger than at present, which you now see ripen in winter and become of a purple colour, and many rude kinds of nourishment besides, ample for hapless mortals, the florid freshness of the world in those days produced. The rivers and fountains then invited them to quench their thirst, as the echoing fall of waters from the high hills now calls, far and wide, the thirsty tribes of wild beasts. Afterwards they occupied the sylvan temples of the nymphs, well known to the wanderers, from which the goddesses sent forth flowing rills of water, to lave with a copious flood the humid rocks, trickling over the green moss, and to swell and burst forth, with a portion of their streams, over the level plain. Nor as yet did they understand how to improve their condition by the aid of fire, or to use skins, and to clothe their bodies with the spoils of wild beasts. But they dwelt in groves, and hollow mountains, and woods, and when compelled to flee from the violence of the wind and rain, sheltered their rude limbs amid the thickets. Nor could they have any regard to any common interest, or understand how to observe any customs or laws among themselves. Whatever prize fortune had thrown in the way of anyone, on that he seized, each knowing only to profit by his own instinct and to live for himself. And Venus united the persons of lovers in the woods, for either mutual desire reconciled each female to the intercourse, or the impetuous force and vehement lust of the man overcame her, or acorns and whortleberries, or choice crabs, were the purchase of her favours. And relying on the extraordinary vigour of their hands and feet, they pursued the sylvan tribes of wild beasts with missile stones and ponderous clubs, and many they overcame, while a few escaped them in their dens, and when surprised by night they threw their savage limbs like bristly boars, unprotected on the earth, covering themselves over with leaves and branches. Nor did they, trembling and wandering in the shades of night, seek to recall the day and the sun with loud cries throughout the fields, but, silent and buried in sleep, they waited till Phoebus with his roseate beams should again spread light over the heavens. For since they had always been accustomed, from their infancy, to see darkness and light produced at alternate seasons, it was impossible that they should ever wonder at the change, or feel apprehension lest, the beams of the sun being withdrawn for ever, eternal night should keep possession of the earth. But what rather gave them trouble was, that the tribes of wild beasts often disturbed the rest of hapless sleepers, while, driven from their cell at the approach of a foaming boar or stout lion, they fled from their rocky shelter, and yielded up with trembling, at the dead of night, their couches of leaves to the savage intruders. Nor yet did the race of men in those days leave with lamentations the sweet light of life in much greater numbers than at present. For though more frequently at that period one individual of their number, being caught by wild beasts and consumed by their teeth, afforded them living food, and filled meanwhile the groves and mountains and forests with his shrieks, as he felt his bowels buried in a living tomb, while those whom flight had saved, with their bodies torn and pressing their trembling hands over their grievous wounds, called on death with horrid cries, until, destitute of relief, and ignorant what their hurts required, cruel tortures deprived them of life. Yet in those times one day did not consign to destruction many thousands of men under military banners, nor did the boisterous floods of the sea dash ships and men upon rocks, but the ocean, though often rising and swelling, raged in vain and to no purpose, and laid aside its empty threats without effect. Nor could the deceitful allurement of its calm water entice, with its smiling waves, any one into danger, for the daring art of navigation was then unknown. Want of food then consigned languishing bodies to death. Now, on the contrary, abundance of luxuries causes destruction. The men of those times often poured out poison for themselves unawares. Now persons of their own accord give it craftily to others. Afterwards, when they procured huts and skins and fire, and the woman united to the man came to dwell in the same place with him, and when the pure and pleasing connections of undivided love were known, and they saw a progeny sprung from themselves, then first the human race began to be softened and civilized. For fire now rendered their shivering bodies less able to endure the cold under the canopy of heaven, and love diminished their strength, and children with their blandishments easily subdued the ferocious tempers of their parents. Then also neighbours, feeling a mutual friendship, began to form agreements not to hurt or injure one another, and they commended, with sounds and gestures, their children and the female sex, to each other's protection, while they signified, with imperfect speech, that it is right for every one to have compassion on the weak. Such concord, however, could not be established universally, but the better and greater part kept their faith inviolate, or the human race would then have been wholly destroyed, and the species could not have continued its generations to the present period. But nature prompted men to utter the various sounds of the tongue, and convenience drew from them the names of things, almost in the same manner as inability to use the tongue seems to excite children to gesture, when it causes them to point with the finger at objects which are present before them. For every creature is sensible that it can use its own faculty. Even before horns are produced on the forehead of a calf, it butts and pushes fiercely with it when enraged, and the young of panthers and whelps of lions contend with their talons and feet and teeth, when their teeth and talons are yet scarcely grown. We see, moreover, that the whole race of birds trust to their wings, and seek a fluttering support from their pinions. To suppose, therefore, that any one man then assigned names to things, and that men thence learned their first words, is to think absurdly. For why should this one man be able to distinguish all things with names, and to utter the varied accents of the voice, and others not be deemed able to do this at the same time? Besides, if others had not also used words among themselves, whence was the knowledge of them engrafted in him? Whence was power first given to him, that he should understand and discern in his mind what expediency would wish to effect? One, likewise, would not be able to compel many and oblige them by force to submit to learn his names of things, nor could he by any means teach, or persuade men unfitted to listen, what was necessary to be done, for neither would they at all bear with patience, or long suffer him to din into their ears, to no purpose, the strange and unintelligible sounds of his voice. Lastly, what is there so wonderful in this matter, if the human race, whose voice and tongue were in full vigour, distinguished various objects by sounds, according to their various feelings, when dumb cattle and even the tribes of wild beasts are wont to utter different and distinct cries when terror or pain affects their hearts, and when joy prevails in them? For this you may observe by manifest instances. When the large flabby jaws of the Molessian dogs begin to growl, as they are irritated, exposing their hard teeth, their violent fury threatens with a far different sound from that which they utter when they merely bark, and fill all the neighbourhood with yelping. And when they begin to lick their whelps tenderly with their tongue, or when they fondle them with their paws, and, snapping at them, affect gently to swallow them up with teeth suspended over them, they soothe them with a sort of whining, using their voice far otherwise than when they howl, deserted in lonely buildings, or when with crouching body they slink whimpering from beneath a blow. Again, does not the voice of the horse seem also to differ, when, as a vigorous steed in the flower of his age, and pierced with the goads of winged love, he rages wildly among the mares, and when he utters a snorting for war from his expanded nostrils, and thus, with his limbs trembling, neighs in quite other tones? Further, the winged tribes, and various birds, hawks, and eagles, and gulls, which amid the waves of the sea seek their food, and living in the salt water, utter far other cries at other times than when they contend for sustenance and fight about prey. Occasionally also the long-lived generations of crows and the flocks of ravens change their hoarse notes with the weather, when they are said sometimes to call for rain and showers, and sometimes to cry for gales of wind. If various feelings, therefore, impel the inferior animals, though they are destitute of speech, to utter various sounds, how much more consonant is it to reason that men, even in those early days, should have been able to distinguish different objects by different names? And lest, perchance, in reference to these subjects, you should meditate with yourself as to the following point, and be anxious to know the origin of fire, I will inform you that lightning first brought flame down upon the earth for mortals, and that from thence all the fire in the world is spread abroad. For we even now see many substances, struck with fire from heaven, ignite, when the ethereal region has sent down its flames. Though it is not to be forgotten, indeed, that when a branching tree struck by the winds is shaken and agitated, moving to and fro, and pressing against the boughs of another tree, fire, excited by the violent friction, is elicited, so that sometimes, while the branches and stems are rubbed together, a fervid glow of flame bursts forth, of which causes, accordingly, either might have supplied fire to mankind. The sun next instructed them to dress their food, and soften it with the heat of flame, for they saw many things throughout the fields, mollified by the force of his beams and subdued by his warmth. Hence those who excelled in sense, and had power of understanding, taught the others every day more and more to change their rude diet, and form a mode of life, for new practices and improvements by means of fire. At length the leaders began to build cities, and to found fortresses as a protection and refuge for themselves. They also divided the cattle and the fields, and allotted them according to the beauty and strength and understanding of each individual, for beauty was then much esteemed, and strength had great influence. Afterwards wealth was introduced, and gold brought to light, which easily robbed the strong and beautiful of their honour, for men, however strong, or endowed with however beautiful a person, generally follow the party of the richer. But to man, whoever governs his life according to true reason, it is great wealth to live on a little with a contented mind, for of a little there is no want. Yet men wished themselves to be honoured and powerful, that their fortune might rest on a steady foundation, and that themselves, being strong, might pass an undisturbed life. But this they desired in vain, for as they strove to reach the highest honours, they rendered the course of their steps full of trouble. And still, though they attain their object, envy, like a thunderbolt, hurls them at times from their preeminence, and seeks them with scorn as into the gloom of Tartarus, so that it is far better to obey in quiet, than to seek to hold states under our sway and to manage kingdoms. Let men, therefore, if they will, sweat out their life's blood, wearying themselves to no purpose, and struggling along the narrow road of ambition, for the highest objects, and whatever are more exposed on eminences, are generally sooner scorched with envy as well as with lightning, since they gather knowledge only from the mouths of others, and pursue things rather from what they hear than from their own judgments. Nor does this folly prevail more now, or will it prevail more hereafter, than it has already prevailed in past time. Kings, therefore, being deposed and slain, the ancient majesty of their thrones and their proud sceptres lay overthrown in the dust, and the illustrious ornament of the royal head, stained with blood beneath the feet of the rabble, mourned the loss of its supreme honour, for that which has been too much feared before is eagerly trodden down. Power, accordingly, returned to the lowest dregs and rabble of mankind, whilst each sought dominion and eminence for himself. But at length the wiser part taught them to establish a government, and made laws for them, that they might consent to observe order. For mankind, weary of passing their lives in a state of violence, were worn out with contentions, on which account they fell more submissively under the power of laws and strict ordinances. For because every one, in his resentment, prepared to take revenge for himself more severely than is now allowed by equitable laws, men for this reason became disgusted with living in strife. Since from this source the fear of punishment poisons the enjoyments of life, for violence and injury involve everyone, and generally recoil upon the head of him from whom they arose, nor is it possible for anyone to live a quiet and peaceable life who violates by his actions the common bonds of peace. For though his guilt escape for a time the knowledge of both gods and men, yet he cannot feel sure that it will always be hidden, since many, speaking frequently in dreams, or being delirious in sickness, are said to have revealed their secrets, and to have published to the world long concealed crimes. In the next place, what cause spread abroad throughout the wide nations of the earth the notion of the existence and power of the gods, and filled cities with altars, and led solemn sacred rites to be instituted, which sacred rites now flourish, and are performed on all important occasions and in all distinguished places, whence also terror pervades mortals, a terror which raises new temples of the deities throughout the whole globe of the earth, and impels men to celebrate their worship on feast days. It is not so difficult as it may seem to explain. For in those early times of which we speak, the tribes of mortals beheld in their minds, even when awake, glorious images as of gods, and saw them in their sleep, still more distinctly, and of a wondrous magnitude of figure. To these, therefore, they attributed vitality, because they seemed to move their limbs, and to utter majestic words, suitable to their distinguished appearance and mighty strength. And they assigned to them an immortal existence, because their appearances came in constant succession, and their form remained the same, although they might certainly have deemed them immortal on another account, as they would consider that beings, endowed with such apparent strength, could not easily be subdued by any destructive force. And they thought them preeminent in happiness, because the fear of death could thus trouble none of them, and because at the same time they saw them, in their dreams, do many and wonderful actions, and experience, as it seemed, no difficulty in the performance of them. Besides, they observed the revolutions of the heavens, and the various seasons of the year go round in a certain order, and yet could not understand by what causes these effects were produced. They had, then, this resource for themselves, to ascribe all things to gods, and to make all things be guided by their will. And the seats and abodes of these gods they placed in the sky, because through the sky the night and the moon are seen to revolve. The moon, I say, the day and the night, and the august constellations of night, and the nocturnal luminaries of the heavens, and the flying meteors, as well as the clouds, the sun, rain, snow, winds, lightnings, hail, and the vehement noises and loud threatening murmurs of the thunder. O unhappy race of men, as they attributed such acts, besides ascribing bitter wrath to the gods, what lamentations did they then prepare for themselves, and what sufferings for us? What fears have they entailed upon our posterity? Nor is it any piety for a man to be seen with his head veiled, turning towards a stone, and drawing near to every altar, or to fall prostrate on the ground, and to stretch out his hands before the shrines of the gods, or to sprinkle the altars with copious blood of four-footed beasts, and to add vows to vows. But it is rather piety to be able to contemplate all things with a serene mind. For when we look up to the celestial regions of the vast world above, and contemplate the firmament studded with glittering stars, and reflect upon the revolutions of the sun and moon, the apprehension lest there should, perchance, be an almighty power of the gods above us, which guides the stars in their various motions, begins then to raise its head, as if awaking within our breast an apprehension which, perhaps, before lay dormant under the weight of other cares. Since poverty of reason and ignorance of natural causes disquiet the mind, while it doubts whether there was any birth or commencement of the world, or whether there is any limit of time, until which the walls of the world, and the silent movements of the heavenly bodies, can endure this incessant labour, or whether the heavens, divinely endowed with an imperishable nature, can, as they roll along time's eternal course, defy the mighty power of endless age. Besides, whose heart does not shrink at the terrors of the gods? Whose limbs do not shudder with dread, when the scorched earth trembles with the awful stroke of lightning, and when the roars of thunder pervade the vast heaven? Do not people and nations tremble, and do not proud monarchs, penetrated with fear of the deities, recoil in every nerve, lest, for some foul deed or arrogant word, the dread time of paying penalty be come? When likewise the mighty force of a tempestuous wind raging over the sea sweeps athwart the deep the commander of a fleet with all his powerful legions and elephants, does he not solicit peace of the gods with vows, and timidly implore them with prayers for a lull of the winds and a prosperous gale? But alas, he implores them to no purpose, for frequently seized by a violent hurricane, he is nevertheless borne away to the shoals of death. Thus some unseen power, apparently, bears upon human things, and seems to trample down proud fasces and cruel axes, and make them merely a sport for itself. Further, when the whole earth totters under our feet, and cities, shaken to their base, fall or threaten to fall, what wonder is it that the nations of the world despise and humble themselves, and admit the vast influence of the gods over the world, and their stupendous power to govern all things? Moreover, brass and gold and iron were discovered, as well as heavy silver and the substance of lead, at a time when fire had consumed mighty forests upon the high mountains, either from lightning having been hurled upon them, or because men, warring among themselves in the woods, had set fire to them for a terror to their enemies, or else because, moved by the goodness of the soil, they wished to lay open fertile fields, and to render the country fit for pasturage, or because they sought to kill the wild beasts, and to enrich themselves with their spoils. For to catch the game by means of pitfalls and fire became a practice before men surrounded the forest with nets, or roused the animals with dogs. However this may be, or from whatever cause the rage of the fire, with frightful noise had consumed the woods from their deepest roots, and had melted the earth with heat, there flowed from the boiling veins uniting in the hollow places of the soil a stream of silver and gold, as well as of brass and lead, which, when they afterwards saw it congealed, and shining with a bright colour on the ground, they took up, being attracted by its glittering and smooth lustre. And they observed that the masses were formed of the same shape as the figure of the receptacle of each had been. It then occurred to them that these metals, being melted with heat, might settle into any form or figure of things, and might also be fashioned by beating out into the sharpest and finest points of instruments, so that they might make tools for themselves, and be able both to cut down the woods, and hew timber, and smooth and polish boards, as well as to pierce, excavate, and bore. These instruments they at first attempted to make of silver and gold, no less than of the strong substance of hard brass, but in vain, for the consistence of those metals yielded and gave way, and both were alike unable to bear severe usage. Accordingly brass was then more in esteem, and gold was neglected on account of its uselessness, as taking only a dull edge and blunt point. Now brass is despised, and gold has succeeded to the highest honours. For thus revolving time changes the seasons of things. That which was once in estimation becomes of no repute at all, while another thing succeeds and bursts forth from contempt, something which is daily more and more sought, and which, when found, flourishes among mankind with special praise and wonderful honour. It is now easy for thee to understand of thyself, my Minimus, how the nature and use of iron were discovered. The first weapons of mankind were the hands, nails, and teeth, also stones and branches of trees, the fragments of the woods, then flame and fire were used as soon as they were known, and lastly was discovered the strength of iron and brass. But the use of brass was known earlier than that of iron, inasmuch as its substance is more easy to work, and its abundance greater. With brass they turned up the soil of the earth, and with brass they excited the tumults of war, and inflicted deep wounds, and took away the cattle and lands of their neighbours, for everything unarmed and defenceless easily surrendered to those that were armed. Then gradually came forth the sword of steel, and the form of the brazen pruning hook was turned into contempt. With iron they began to cleave the ground, and the contests of doubtful warfare were made equal. And it appears that man mounted armed upon the back of the horse, and guided it with reins, and exerted his right hand to fight, before he tried the hazards of war in a two-horsed chariot. It also doubtless occurred earlier to yoke 2 horses than 4, or then to mount in full armour on chariots equipped with scythes. In process of time the Carthaginians taught fierce elephants, with towers on their backs and with snake-like proboscis, to endure the wounds of war, and to throw vast martial battalions into confusion. Thus sad discord produced one invention after another, to spread terror in battle among the tribes of men, and added daily increase to the horrors of contention. They tried bulls also in the business of war, and endeavoured to impel fierce boars against the enemy. The Parthians, too, sent strong lions before them, with armed keepers and daring guides, to govern them and hold them in chains. But such attempts were in vain, for the savage beasts, heated with tumultuous slaughter, and shaking their terrible manes on every side, disordered all troops without distinction, nor could the riders soothe the spirits of their horses, which were alarmed at the roaring of the lions, and turn them with the reins against the enemy. The lions, in their rage, threw themselves with leaps among the soldiers in every part. They flew at the faces of those who came against them, and seized on others from behind unawares, and clasping them round about, threw them to the earth, sinking under wounds, clinging to them with their strong teeth and hooked talons. The bulls tossed their own people, and trampled them under foot. They gored with their horns and sides of the horses, and their bellies underneath, and tore up the earth with alarming fury. But the boars killed their own friends with strong tusks, staining in their rage the broken darts with their blood, and spread promiscuous destruction among cavalry and infantry. For though the horses, leaping aside, shunned the fierce attacks of their teeth, or rearing up pawed the air with their feet, yet they struggled to no purpose, since you might have seen them sink down hamstrung, and cover the earth with a heavy fall. Whatever beasts they thought sufficiently tame at home, they saw, in the heat of action, maddened with wounds, cries, flight, terror, and tumult. Nor could they recall any portion of them to order, for all the different kinds of beasts scattered themselves abroad, as elephants even now, when imperfectly inured to weapons, flee hither and thither, after having inflicted much cruel damage on their masters. Thus and with these views it is possible that they might act. But I am scarcely inclined to think that they could not originally foresee and consider in their minds how general and calamitous and evil such warfare would prove to succeeding times. But they were willing to adopt this practice, not so much with the hope of conquering as to cause annoyance to the enemy, and men who distrusted their numbers and were without efficient arms naturally grew desperate, and were ready to perish themselves if they might but destroy their opponents. The garment of skins, fastened together, existed before the woven dress. The woven succeeded the discovery of iron, for by iron weaving is performed. Nor indeed of any other material can instruments of such smoothness as treadles, spindles, shuttles, and rattling yarn beams be produced. And nature obliged men to work in wool before women, for all the male sex far excel in art and are much more ingenious than the female. This state of things continued until the sturdy husbandman made it a reproach to the workers in wool, making them consent to resign it to the hands of women, and themselves to endure hard labour together with the tillers of the ground, and strengthen their limbs and hands with severe toil. But of sowing and planting, and of grafting, nature, the great producer of all things, was herself the first example and origin. For berries and acorns that fell from the trees exhibited, in the proper season, a crop of seedlings underneath, from observing which they also ventured to entrust slips to the boughs, and to plant young stocks throughout the fields. They then tried different methods of tilling the kindly soil, and saw wild fruits become improved in their lands by being cherished and indulgently cultivated. And they compelled the woods to withdraw daily further up the mountains, and to give room below for tillage, so that they might have meadows, lakes, rivulets, cornfields, and rich vineyards throughout the hills and plains, and that a green tract of olives, marking the ground, might run between other trees, stretching far over the heights and valleys and plains, as you now see all gardens distinguished with varied beauty, which, intersected with rows of dulcet apples, men lay out and adorn, and which they keep planted around with other fruit trees. But to imitate with the mouth the liquid voices of birds was practised long before men could play melodious tunes, and delight the ear with music. The whistling of the zephyr through the empty reeds first taught the rustics to blow through hollow stalks. Then by degrees they learned the sweet plaintive notes which the pipe, pressed by the fingers of the players, pours forth. The pipe which is now found through all the pathless groves and woods and glades, through the solitary haunts and divine resting places of the shepherds. Thus time by degrees suggests every discovery, and skill evolves it into the regions of light and fame. These melodies softened the hearts of those swains, and delighted them when they were satisfied with food, for then everything affords pleasure. Oftentimes, therefore, stretched upon the soft grass near a rivulet of water under the boughs of a high tree, they socially, though with no great wealth, gratified their senses with pleasure, especially when the weather smiled upon them, and the seasons of the year painted the green herbage with flowers. Then jests, and pleasant talk, and agreeable laughter, were wont to be enjoyed, for then the rustic muse had full vigour and influence. Then sportive gaiety prompted them to deck their heads and shoulders with garlands of flowers and leaves, and to stand forth in irregular dances, moving their limbs stiffly, and to stamp on Mother Earth with heavy foot, whence arose smiles and jocund laughter, because all these exhibitions had then greater effect, as being new and wonderful. Hence to produce various modulations of voice, and to weave tunes, and to run over the reeds with compressed lips, were compensations for want of sleep as they watched during the night. From whom also the men of the present day, wakeful in nocturnal orgies, have received and maintain the same practices, and have learned to preserve regularity of numbers, and yet they do not, even now, enjoy their amusement with greater delight than that which the sylvan sons of earth then experienced. For that gratification which is present, if we have previously known nothing more agreeable, delights us preeminently, and seems to be superior to everything else, but anything better, which is discovered afterwards, blunts and alters our feelings as to all we enjoyed before. Thus dislike of acorns came upon mankind, Thus those ancient beds, formed of grass and leaves, were abandoned. Skins too, and the savage dress fell into contempt, a dress of which I can imagine the discovery to have excited such envy that he who first wore it possibly died from a treacherous combination against him, and that his garment, being torn with much bloodshed among those who slew him, was at last spoiled and rendered incapable of being used. In those days, skins, in these gold and purple, disturbed the life of men with cares and harass it with war. In which regard, as I think, blame has fallen far more justly on us than on them. For cold tormented the uncovered children of earth, when they were without skins. But to be destitute of a purple garment, adorned with gold and cumbrous figures, causes no inconvenience to us, provided that we have, instead of it, a common dress that may defend us against the weather. The human race, accordingly, labour perpetually in vain and to no purpose, and consume their life in empty cares, evidently because they do not know what is the proper limit to acquisition, and how far real pleasure extends. And this ignorance has gradually carried them into a sea of evils, and thoroughly aroused the mighty tumults of war. But the wakeful and untiring sun and moon, that illumine with their light the vast revolving region of the heaven, taught mankind that the seasons of the year proceed, and that every thing is carried on by a certain law and in a certain order. They afterwards passed their lives defended with strong fortresses, and the earth, divided and marked out, was cultivated and peopled. The sea was next covered with ships for the sake of perfumes. Men had auxiliaries and allies, with settled treaties. The poets now began to hand down great deeds in their poems. Letters had only a short time before been discovered. Hence our age cannot trace what previously occurred, except so far as reason gives indications. Ships and the culture of land, walls of cities, laws, arms, roads, garments, and other things of this kind, all the blessings and all the delights of life, poems, pictures, and artfully wrought statues, improving use, and the experience of the active mind, proceeding step by step, taught all mankind gradually to adopt. Thus time by degrees suggests every discovery, and skill evolves it into the regions of light and celebrity. Thus in the various arts we see that different inventions proceed from different minds, until they reach the highest point of excellence. End of section 15, book 5, part 3. Recording by Nathan at antiquityandwriter.wordpress.com.
Section 16 of On the Nature of Things. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leni. On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, translated by John Selby Watson. Section 16, Book 6, Part 1. In early days, Athens, of illustrious name, first communicated to suffering mortals the method of producing corn. Athens also first improved life and established laws. Athens, moreover, first afforded sweet consolations of existence, when she gave birth to that preeminent man, endowed with such mighty genius, who once poured forth instruction on all subjects from his truth-speaking mouth, and whose fame, spread abroad of old on account of his discoveries, is raised, since his death, even to the skies. For when he observed that almost all things which necessity requires for subsistence, and by which mankind may render life free from care, are always prepared for them by nature, yet saw that men may abound in wealth, may be crowned with honour and applause, and may have pride in the good fame of their children, but that, notwithstanding, there may be griefs in the heart of each at home, and each may disquiet life with unhappy querulousness of mind, he understood, at once, the cause which compels them to lament with such troublesome complaints. He perceived that the vessel itself was in fault, and that all good things which were collected and brought into it from abroad were spoiled by its imperfection within. He was convinced of this, partly because he saw that it was unsound and perforated, so that it could never by any means be filled, and partly because he found that it contaminated with an offensive taste, as it were, all things that it had received within it. He therefore purged the minds of men with the words of truth, and set bounds to desire and fear. He explained what is the chief good at which we all aim, and showed the way, in a narrow track, by which we may in a straight course arrive at it. And he taught what evil prevails everywhere in human affairs, which flows and arises variously, either from casual accident or from necessity, according as nature has appointed. And he showed from what portals each ought to be met, and proved that mankind revolve in their breasts, for the most part unnecessarily, the sorrowful tumults of care. For, as children tremble and fear everything in thick darkness, so we, in delight, fear sometimes things which are not more to be feared than those which children dread and imagine about to happen in the dark. This terror of the mind, therefore, it is not the rays of the sun or the bright arrows of day that must dispel, but the contemplation of nature and the exercise of reason. For which cause I shall more carefully proceed to complete, with some further observations, the undertaking which I have in hand. And since I have shown that the regions of the world are mortal, and that the heaven consists of substance generated and perishable, and that whatever things are produced, and must necessarily be produced, within it, are for the most part necessarily dissolved, attend now to what further remains to be said, since his friends once more exhort the charioteer to ascend his stately chariot, testifying by their applause that all things which before were adverse to his course are now altered through their gentle favour. But the phenomena which men observe to occur in the earth and the heavens, when, as often happens, they are perplexed with fearful thoughts, overawe their minds with a dread of the gods, and humble and depress them to the earth, for ignorance of natural causes obliges them to refer all things to the power of the divinities, and to resign the dominion of the world to them. Because of these effects they can by no means see the origin, and accordingly suppose that they are produced by divine influence. For if those who have fairly understood that the gods pass a life free from care, nevertheless wonder, meanwhile, how things can severally be carried on, especially in those matters which are seen in the ethereal regions above our heads, they are carried back again to their old notions of religion, and set over themselves cruel tyrants, whom they unhappily believe able to do all things, being themselves ignorant what can and what cannot be done, and by what means limited power and a deeply fixed boundary is assigned to everything. On which account, through their own blind reasoning, they are led away more and more into error. Such fancies, unless you expel from your mind and put far from you unworthy thoughts of the gods, and cease to harbour notions inconsistent with their tranquillity, the sacred power of the divinities will often, as being offended by you, obstruct your peace. Not that the supreme majesty of the deities can really be violated, so that it should seek through anger to inflict severe punishment, but because you yourself, when you might be calm in tranquil peace, will suppose that the gods cherish vast floods of wrath against you. Nor will you approach the temples of the deities with a heart at ease, nor be able to admit into your mind, with placid serenity of contemplation, those images which are born from the sacred persons of the gods, as indications of their divine beauty, into the breasts of mankind. Hence you may conceive what sort of life would follow such a belief. And although many observations have been made by me, to the end that true wisdom may repel such a life far from us, many more still remain to be added, and to be recommended by smooth verse, and the nature of things above us and of the heaven is to be understood. Tempests and bright lightnings are to be sung, their nature is to be told, and from what cause they pursue their course, lest, having foolishly divided the heaven into parts, you should be anxious as to the quarter from which the flying flame may come, or to what region it may betake itself, and tremble to think how it penetrates through walled enclosures, and how, having exercised its power, it extricates itself from them. Of which phenomena the multitude can by no means see the causes, and think that they are accomplished by supernatural power. Thou, O skilful muse Calliope, solace of men, and pleasure of the gods, mark out my path for me, as I run to the white goal at the end of the course, that, under thy guidance, I may attain a crown with distinguished applause. In the first place, the blue skies are convulsed with thunder, because the clouds in the air, as they fly along on high, when winds are opposite to each other, meet together in collision. For in a clear part of the sky no noise takes place, but the more densely the clouds are collected, in any quarter whatsoever, with so much louder a noise does the thunder frequently proceed from that quarter. The clouds, too, it is to be observed, can neither be of so dense a substance as stones and wood are, nor again of so subtle a consistence as flying mists and smoke are. For, in the one case, they would either fall, being brought down by their own dead weight, or, in the other, they would, like smoke, be unable to keep together, or to retain within them the cold snows and showers of hail. Clouds also produce a sound, by certain motions, athwart the regions of the open sky, as canvas, stretched over the large theatres, makes a noise when it is tossed about among the posts and beams. Sometimes a cloud is ruffled and torn in pieces by boisterous winds, and then imitates the rattling noise of paper, for that kind of crackling you may also observe in thunder. Or it sounds as when the winds shake with their blasts a hanging garment or flying sheets of parchment, and rattle them in the air. It sometimes happens, moreover, that clouds cannot so much come into collision front to front, as meet side to side, rubbing their masses slowly against one another with various movements, whence that dry kind of sound which you may sometimes observe strikes upon the ear, and which is protracted for some time, until the clouds have escaped from the confined space. Thus too, not unfrequently, all things around, convulsed with violent thunder, seem to tremble, and the mighty walls of the capacious world appear at once to have started and burst asunder. And this happens when a collected body of strong wind has suddenly involved itself within a cloud, and being shut up there, forces the cloud, as the whirling air stretches it more and more in all directions, to become hollow, but with a thick crust round the cavity. Afterwards, when the strong force and spirit of the wind within has fermented, it at length, being emitted from confinement, gives a crack, with a frightfully crashing sound. Nor is this surprising, when a small bladder filled with air often produces, if suddenly burst, a loud sound of a similar kind. There is also another reason why the winds, when they blow among the clouds, may produce a sound, for we often see branched and rough clouds carried about in the air in various directions, so that such a noise may arise in the clouds as when the north-west gales blow through a thick wood, and the leaves make a rustling and the boughs crackle. It happens likewise at times that the vehement force of a strong blast tears a cloud asunder, cleaving it through with a straightforward assault. For what the wind may effect in the sky, manifest experience demonstrates on the earth, where, though it is less violent, it often overthrows and tears up lofty woods from their lowest roots. There are also waves in the clouds, which, breaking heavily, make a murmuring noise, such as is likewise excited in deep rivers and in the vast sea, when it is broken and rages with the tide. It occurs, moreover, that when the burning violence of lightning passes from one cloud into another, the second cloud, if it receives the fire into a large body of moisture, immediately extinguishes it with a loud noise, as hot iron, taken from a glowing furnace, hisses when we plunge it into the cold water standing near. Further, if a cloud, which is more dry than ordinary, receives the lightning, it is at once set on fire and scorched up with a loud sound, such as is heard if a flame, on any occasion, spreads over hills covered with laurel, burning it up with great fury, and impelled by a storm of wind. Nor does any substance burn with a more startling sound, as the flame crackled among its boughs, than the Delphic laurel of Phoebus. In addition, we may observe that a great crashing of ice and fall of hail among the vast clouds in the sky frequently produce a loud sound, for masses of cloud closely condensed and mixed with hail are, when the wind compresses them, shattered and broken to pieces. It lightens also when the clouds by their collision have struck out numerous atoms of fire, just as if a stone strikes another stone, or a piece of iron, for then, in like manner, a light bursts forth and scatters abroad bright sparks of fire. But it always happens that we hear the sound of the thunder some time after we perceive it lighten, because objects which affect the hearing always come more slowly to the ears than those which affect the sight arrive at the eye. This you may easily understand from the following instance. If you observe a man at a distance cutting down the trunk of a tree with an axe, you will see the stroke itself, before the noise of the stroke makes any sound in the air. So too we see the lightning before we hear the thunder, which, however, is emitted at the same time with the flash, and produced from the same collision of the clouds. Clouds likewise sometimes tinge the parts around with swiftly diffused light, and the storm gleams with tremulous ardour from the following cause. When wind has penetrated a cloud, and, rolling about within it, has made the cloud, as I showed above, become hollow in the middle, and condensed round about, it acquires heat by its own activity, as you see all bodies glow when made warm by motion. And the ball of lead, from being whirled through a long space, even melts. This hot wind, accordingly, when it has burst a dark cloud, suddenly scatters atoms of heat, which are, as it were, driven out by its violence, and which cause the vibrating gleams of the lightning. Then follows the noise, which affects the ear more slowly than the beams which come to our eyes strike them. This, you will understand, takes place when the clouds are condensed, and when they are piled at the same time high above one another, with extraordinary effect. And do not be misled by the circumstance that we from below see more plainly how broad the clouds are than how high they are built up. For observe their appearance when the winds will carry these clouds resembling great mountains along through the air, or when you shall see on the sides of high hills some clouds piled upon others, and those placed in the upper region, while the winds are buried in repose, pressing down those in the lower. And you will then be able to comprehend their vastness of bulk, and observe the caverns within them, which are formed, as it were, of hanging rocks. And when the winds, at the rising of a tempest, have filled them, the winds themselves, being thus confined within the clouds, complain with a loud murmuring, and utter threats like wild beasts in dens. Sometimes they send their roarings in one direction, and sometimes in another, through the clouds, and seeking an outlet, turn themselves about and roll together atoms of fire from the cloudy masses. And thus they collect many igneous particles, and whirl about the flames within as in hollow furnaces, until, the cloud having burst, they dart forth with a flash. From this cause also it happens that gleaming golden colour of liquid fire flies down upon the earth, inasmuch as the clouds themselves must of necessity contain many atoms of fire, as, when they are without any moisture, their colour is generally fiery and shining. For they must receive many igneous particles from the light of the sun, so that they naturally look red, and send forth fire. When, therefore, the wind, driving them along, has thrust, compressed, and condensed them into one place, they pour forth the atoms of fire, which are squeezed out, and which cause the colour of flame to shine through the sky. It likewise lightens when the clouds in heaven are rarefied. For when the wind gently divides and attenuates them as they pass, those atoms which cause the lightning must fall even in spite of them, and then it lightens without any great terror, or sounds, or commotion. Of what nature, moreover, the lightning consists, its strokes, and the signs and marks which are burned into objects by its fire, and which exhale a strong scent of sulphur, sufficiently indicate. For these are tokens of fire, and not of wind or rain. Besides, lightning often set on fire the roofs of houses, and revel with a swift flame throughout houses themselves. For nature has formed this attenuated fire, you may be sure, of the most minute particles of flame, and with the subtlest motions and atoms, so that nothing whatever can resist it. Powerful lightning, indeed, passes through the walls of houses like sounds and voices. It passes through stones and brass, and melts brass and gold in a moment. It causes wine also to flow out suddenly from vessels which still remain entire, because, as is evident, its heat, at its contact, easily relaxes and expands all the earthen substance of the vessel, so that, penetrating into the liquid itself, it actively separates and dispels the atoms of the wine, agitating it with its flashing heat to a degree which the warmth of the sun seems unable to produce in an age, so much more active and forcible is this influence of lightning. How these lightnings are generated and become possessed of such force that they can split towers with a stroke, overturn houses, tear away beams and planks, demolish and scatter abroad the monuments of heroes, deprive men of life, destroy whole herds of cattle at once, and with what power they can effect all other things of this kind, I will now proceed to explain, nor will I delay you longer with promises. It must be admitted that lightnings are produced from clouds that are dense, and piled high in the air, for none are ever emitted from a clear sky, or from clouds that are but thinly collected. For doubtless manifest observation shows this to be the case, because, at the time when thunder is heard, the clouds are condensed from all sides through the whole atmosphere, so that we might suppose all the darkness to have left Acheron, and to have filled the immense vault of heaven, so formidably, when the dire gloom of storms has collected, and when the tempest begins to forge its thunderbolts, does the face of black terror impend over the earth from above. Over the sea, too, very frequently, a black stormy cloud, like a flood of pitch flowing down from heaven, so terribly descends upon the waters, and rolls onward in such thick darkness, and draws with it a black tempest so pregnant with thunder and hurricanes, being charged too to the utmost with fire and wind, that even men upon land shudder and seek shelter in their houses. Thus, therefore, we must believe that tempestuous clouds rise high above our heads, for neither could clouds overwhelm the earth with such thick darkness, the sun being wholly obscured, unless they were built up, numbers upon numbers, to a great height, nor could they, when descending in rain, deluge the earth with such vast showers as to make the rivers overflow, and the plains a sheet of water, unless the atmosphere contained clouds ranged high over one another. In the air, therefore, at the time of storms, all parts of the clouds are replete with wind and fire, and thus thunders and lightnings are produced. For I have shown above that the hollow clouds must contain many atoms of heat, and they must also of necessity receive many from the rays and warmth of the sun. Thus, when the same wind which has collected the clouds by chance into any one place has elicited from them many atoms of heat, and with that heat has mingled itself, the vortex of wind compressed within the cloud whirls itself about in it, and sharpens the lightning, as in a hot furnace within its depths. For this wind is heated in two ways. It both grows warm by its own motion, and by the contact of fire. Then, when the substance of the wind has grown hot of itself, or the strong influence of fire has excited it, the lightning, being ripe as it were, bursts suddenly through the cloud, and the fiery gleam is roused and driven forth, illumining all places with vibrating light, close upon which follows the awful crash of thunder, so that the regions of heaven above seem suddenly to be disruptured and to totter. Tremor then violently pervades the earth, and murmurs run along the lofty skies. For almost all the stormy air then trembles with the shock, and loud noises are sent forth, after which concussion follows heavy and abundant rain, so that the whole sky seems to be turned into showers, and thus falling precipitately to excite the waters to a new deluge. So mighty a sound issues forth from the displosion of a cloud, and from a tempest of wind, when the lightning flies abroad with its burning impetus. Sometimes, too, the vehement force of the wind falls upon a dense cloud externally, striking on its summit just ripe for explosion, and when it has burst through it, there flies out instantly the fiery vortex which we, in our native language, call lightning. And this is not confined to one point only, but extends to other parts, wheresoever the force of the wind has diffused itself. It happens at times also that a furious wind, though issuing forth without fire, yet ignites as it goes in a long space and protracted flight, losing too in its course some of those larger atoms which cannot penetrate through the air equally with the smaller, and collecting from the air itself as it flies through it some of those minute particles which, when mixed, generate fire, almost in the same manner as a ball of lead very frequently grows hot in its course, when, throwing off many atoms of cold, it conceives heat in the atmosphere. It occurs, moreover, that the force of a mere stroke excites fire in a cloud, when a cold blast of wind, darting forth without any fire at all, has struck upon it; because, as is evident, when the wind has dashed against the cloud with a violent impetus, atoms of heat may flow both from the wind itself and also from that cloudy substance which then receives its impact, just as fire flies out when we strike a stone with iron, nor because the substance of iron is cold do those particles of igneous brightness the less, on that account, flow together at the stroke. Thus any substance, likewise, must naturally be kindled by lightning, if it be adapted and disposed to take fire. Nor can the substance of the wind be easily supposed to be altogether cold, considering its rapid flight from the parts whence it was so forcibly discharged from above. For though it be not kindled by heat in its descent before it arrives in these lower regions, it yet comes to them tepid and mixed with warmth. But the activity and impulse of the lightning are so great as you observe them to be, and the thunderbolts in general fly with so swift a descent, because the force of the wind, when roused, first collects itself fully within the clouds, and makes a great struggle to issue forth. Then, when the cloud can no longer restrain the increased violence of its efforts, its fury bursts out, and flies, accordingly, with wonderful impetus, like darts which are hurled from powerful engines. Add to this that it consists of small and smooth particles, nor is it easy for any body to withstand so subtle a substance, for it winds and penetrates through the most minute passages. It is not, therefore, checked or delayed by many obstacles, and it accordingly flies and spreads with the most active swiftness. Consider, further, that all bodies universally tend downwards by nature, and that, when an impulse is added, the swiftness is doubled and the force aggravated, so that, whatever obstacles oppose its power, it but the sooner and the more vigorously scatters them with a stroke, and pursues its own course. Besides, that which comes to the earth with a long flight must acquire speed, which continually increases by progression, and augments its vehement impetus, and gives force to its stroke. For its velocity causes whatever atoms there are in the body to be borne forward, as it were, straight to one point, combining them all as they roll on in that single direction. Perhaps the lightning, too, may, in its passage through the sky, attract to itself certain particles from the air, which may increase the violence of its strokes. And it passes through substances that remain uninjured, and penetrates many objects that continue unaltered, because the liquid fire finds a passage into them by the pores. And many bodies it rends asunder, when the atoms of the lightning strike against the atoms of their substances, where they are held in close contexture. It moreover easily dissolves brass, and melts gold in a moment, because its substance consists of infinitely small particles, and of atoms that are smooth, which easily penetrate bodies, and, when they have penetrated, suddenly dissolve all connections, and loosen all bonds. The vault of heaven, studded with glittering stars, and the whole earth round about, are shaken with thunder in autumn, when the flowery season of spring displays itself more than at other times. For in winter heat is deficient, and in summer the winds fail, and the clouds are not of so dense a consistence. But when the seasons of the year are between the two, all the various causes of thunder then concur. For the intermediate portion of the year blends the cold and the heat, both of which are necessary to produce thunder for us, so that, for the generation of it, there may be a discord in things, and that the atmosphere, raging with heat and wind, may be agitated with a vast tumult. For the beginning of summer and the end of winter is the season of spring, from which cause the two dissimilar natures, heat and cold, must at that time jar with one another, and produce a commotion as they mingle. And the termination of summer comes on, meeting the commencement of winter, at a time which is called the season of autumn, and then, too, violent colds contend with violent heats. These seasons may, therefore, be styled the war times of the year. Nor is it wonderful if, at these conjunctures, much thunder and lightning takes place, and if tumultuous tempests are excited in the sky, since there arises disturbance from doubtful strife on either hand, heat contending on the one side, and winds mingled with rain on the other. This is the way to learn the true nature of igneous lightning, and to understand by what power it produces every effect, not to seek for indications of the hidden mind of the gods by turning over, with futile research, the verses of Etruria, superstitiously observing whence the fleeting fire has come, or to which quarter it has turned itself, how it has penetrated through walled apartments, and how, having exercised its power, it has extricated itself from them, or what injury the stroke of a bolt from heaven can inflict. But if Jupiter and the other gods shake the shining regions of heaven with terrific thunder, and hurl the lightning whithersoever each has thought fit, why do they not take special care that those who are guilty of reckless and detestable wickedness may, being struck, inhale the flames of lightning into their pierced breasts as a bitter warning to mortals? And why rather is he who is conscious to himself of no one disgraceful act, involved and overwhelmed, innocent as he is, with flames, and carried off suddenly with a whirlwind and fire from heaven? Why also, if the gods hurl thunderbolts at men, do they ever seek solitary places and labour in vain? Or do they then exercise their arms and strengthen their elbows? And why, it may be asked, do they suffer the weapon of Father Jupiter to be blunted against the earth? Or why does he himself suffer it, and not save it for his enemies? Furthermore, why does Jupiter never hurl his bolts over the earth, and scatter broad thunder from a clear sky? Does he wait till storms threaten, and, when the clouds have spread over the heaven, come down into their vortex, that he may hence aim the strokes of his weapon from a nearer point? For what reason, moreover, does he hurl his bolts into the sea? Of what does he accuse the waves, and the watery flood, and the liquid plains? Besides, if he wishes us to guard against the blow of the thunderbolt, why does he hesitate to contrive means that we may see it when it's hurled? But if he desires to overwhelm us with his lightning unawares, why does he thunder in the quarter from which he aims, so that we may avoid it? Why does he first excite darkness and noises and murmurings in the air? And how can you believe that he hurls his bolts in various directions at the same time? Or would you venture to say it never occurs that many strokes take effect at the same time? But it has often occurred, and must often occur, that as, in a storm, rains and showers fall on many places at once, so many thunderstrokes are discharged on the earth at the same moment. Moreover, why does he shatter the sacred temples of the other gods, and his own stately abodes, with his destructive lightning? And why does he break in pieces the well-wrought statues of the divinities, and rob his own images of honour by violent disfigurement? And why does he generally aim at high places? At which it is evident that he does aim, inasmuch as we see most traces of his fire, and see them more distinctly upon the loftiest mountains. End of section 16.
Section 17 of On the Nature of Things. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. Translated by John Selby Watson. Section 17, Book 6, Part 2. Furthermore, it is easy to understand from these observations how those phenomena, which the Greeks from their nature have called presteres, sent down from above, descend into the sea. For it sometimes happens that they drop like a column let down from the sky into the ocean, around which column the waters boil, being excited by violent blasts of wind, and whatever vessels are then caught in that vortex are tossed about and incur the greatest danger. This occurs when, as is at times the case, the impetuous force of the wind is not able to burst a cloud of which it has taken possession, but bears it down, so that it becomes by degrees like a pillar reaching from the heaven into the sea, as if something were thrust down from above with a hand, and the force of an arm, and stretched into the waters. Hence, when the fury of the wind has burst the cloud, it rushes forth into the sea, and excites an extraordinary agitation among the waves. For the blast descends as a rolling whirlwind, and brings down with it the cloud, which is of a yielding substance, and not easy to be disruptured, and when it has once thrust the heavy body of the cloud into the water of the ocean, it suddenly plunges itself wholly into the waves, and disturbs all the sea with a mighty noise, forcing it to boil with agitation. It happens also at times that a vortex of wind involves itself in clouds, gathering up cloudy atoms from the air, and imitates, as it were, a prester sent down from heaven. When this vortex has descended to the earth and has burst, it vomits forth, and tempests abroad, the impetuous fury of a whirlwind. But such a vortex, because it is formed but seldom, and because the hills must obstruct its progress on the land, appears more commonly in the wide prospect and open atmosphere over the sea. Clouds are formed when many atoms of a rough and hooked nature, flying in the higher region of the heaven above us, have suddenly come together and combined, atoms which, though attached only in a slight degree, may yet be held united in a body. These first cause small clouds to gather; those small clouds then unite, and are combined with one another, and as they join, swell and are carried along by the winds with such violence, that at length a raging tempest arises. It occurs too that the nearer to any part of the sky the elevated summits of the hills are, so much the more constantly do they smoke, as it were, with the thick mist of a yellow cloud, because when the clouds first gather, and before the eye can discern their thin substance, the winds, carrying them off, collect them on the highest tops of the hills. Here at last it happens that, when a larger collection is formed, one dense and solid cloud seems both to show itself and to rise at the same time from the summit of the hills into the clear sky. For the nature of the ground itself, and our own perceptions as we climb high mountains, demonstrate that breezy eminences are open to the ascent of exhalations. Besides, that nature raises many atoms of vapour from the whole surface of the ocean, garments suspended upon the shore testify, inasmuch as they contract and retain moisture. To augment the clouds, therefore, many atoms seem likely to arise from the motion of the salt water, for the nature and action of all waters is similar. Moreover, we observe mists and vapours arise from all rivers, and from the earth itself also, which, exhaled from it like a breath, are in the same manner carried upwards, and cover the sky with obscurity, and, uniting together by degrees, form clouds high in the air. For the influence of the starry heaven above, too, keeps down the vapours, and, condensing them, weaves the blue sky over, as it were, with clouds. It is possible likewise that to this assemblage of clouds may come seminal atoms from without the heaven, which may assist to form mists and flying storms. For I have shown that the number of primordial atoms is countless, and that the extent of the depth of space is infinite, and I have demonstrated too with how great celerity seminal particles fly, and how instantaneously they have power to pass through an inexpressible distance. It is not therefore wonderful if storms and darkness, diffused from above, cover in a short time such vast mountains as well as the whole sea and land, since on every side exits and entrances are allowed to the elemental atoms through all the passages of the air, and, as it were, through all the breathing places of the vast universe around. Attend now, and I will explain how rain collects in the clouds above, and how the showers are precipitated and descend upon the earth. In the first place I shall observe that many atoms of moisture arise, together with the clouds themselves, from all things on the earth, and that both these substances, the clouds and the water which is contained in the clouds, increase together in the same manner as our body grows together with the blood that is in it, and as sweat and other moisture, which are diffused throughout the limbs, are augmented together with them. The clouds too, when the wind drives them over the wide sea, frequently attract much moisture from the salt water, like fleeces of wool suspended in the air. In like manner moisture is raised from all rivers into the clouds, where, when numerous particles of water have in many ways collected, and have been augmented from every quarter, the swollen clouds strive for two reasons to discharge themselves, for the force of the wind presses them, and the mass of clouds itself, when a greater body than ordinary has united, urges and weighs them down from above, and makes the rain flow forth upon the earth. Moreover, when the clouds are rarefied by the wind, or when they are dissolved by the influence of the sun's heat from above, they forthwith discharge rain, their moisture distilling as wax, thoroughly melted, drops over a strong fire. But violent rain takes place when the clouds are vehemently urged by both forces, being densely heaped upon one another and pressed by the impetuosity of the wind. And rains are accustomed to last long and to continue for a considerable period, when many particles of moisture flow together, and when there are clouds on clouds heaped one over another, pouring down water from above, and from every part around, and when the whole earth, fuming with vapour, sends back moisture into the air. Then, when the sun, in the midst of a dark storm, and when the rain descends opposite to him, has shone upon the shower with his rays, the hues of the rainbow appear upon the black clouds. Other matters which gather above us and are produced above us, and all bodies, all I say without exception, which collect in the clouds, as snow, wind, hail, and cold frost, as well as the strong power of ice, the great hardener of the waters, and the restraint which everywhere delays the eager rivers, all these, though numerous, it is yet very easy to understand and to comprehend how they are produced, and from what cause they arise, when you have thoroughly learned what virtues and qualities belong to the atoms which constitute their substance. Give me now your attention further, and learn what is the cause of earthquakes. And first, suppose the earth to be below as it is above, filled in every part with airy caverns, and containing also in its bosom many lakes and many pools, as well as stones and fissured rocks; while you must likewise suppose that it rolls along forcibly, beneath the surface of the soil, many hidden rivers, floods, and submerged rocks, for nature herself requires that the earth be similar to itself throughout. These points, then, being laid down and admitted, the earth quakes on the surface when it is shaken by great falls of substances beneath, as when age brings down vast caverns, for then whole mountains sink, and, from the violent shock, tremblings spread far and wide in a moment, an effect which we may naturally imagine, since whole houses totter by the side of a road when shaken with wagons, though of no great weight; nor are edifices less agitated when the stout drivers of chariots hurry along the street the iron rounds of the wheels. It happens also that when a large mass of earth rolls down, from the effects of time, into a wide and deep pool of water, the water is agitated, and the earth too trembles with the concussion of the flood, as a vessel of liquid cannot stand still upon the ground unless the liquid, after being shaken, has ceased to sway with a rocking motion within it. Moreover, when wind, collected in the hollow places under the earth, bears strongly from one quarter, and, struggling with vast power, crowds into the deep caverns, the earth, towards the part where the force of the blast directs itself, inclines and gives way, and then the buildings which are erected upon the earth's surface, sloping and being driven from the perpendicular, lean in the same direction, and so much the more as they respectively rise higher into the air, while the beams, being stretched, stand out, as ready to start from their places. And do men hesitate to believe that a time of ruin and destruction awaits the whole fabric of the world, when they see so vast a mass of the earth give way? Whereas even now, unless the winds were to remit their fury, no power could save all things, or could hinder them from going to destruction. But because they relax and struggle by turns, and, as if collecting their force, return to the charge, and then retreat as if repulsed, the earth on this account oftener threatens ruin than actually suffers it, for it inclines and starts back, as it were, only for a time, and then, making an effort with its whole weight, recovers its station. From this cause, accordingly, all our houses tremble and reel, the highest more than the middling more than the lowest scarcely at all. There is also this cause of great quaking of the earth to be mentioned. when wind and any vast quantity of air, collected either without or within the earth, has suddenly thrown itself into hollow places under the ground, it there rages at first with violent fury among the vast caverns, and rolls and urges itself along; but at length, when its force is roused and excited, it bursts forth abroad, and, cleaving the deep soil, forms a huge yawning chasm, as happened in Syrian Sidon, and was seen at Aegum in the Peloponnesus; which cities such an eruption of air and an earthquake produced at the same time overthrew and destroyed. Many other cities also, by reason of violent earthquakes, have sunk down to the ground, and many cities with their inhabitants have been overwhelmed in the sea. But if the force of the air and violent fury of the wind do not burst through the soil, they yet spread like shuddering blasts through the numerous openings in the ground, and thus cause a tremor on the surface, as cold, when it penetrates into our limbs, shakes them and compels them to tremble and quiver against our will. Men, therefore, in cities are appalled on such occasions with double terror, for they dread the buildings above them, and are afraid at the same time lest the earth should suddenly break up the depths below, and lest, being disruptured and disordered, it should open wide its jaws and prepare to fill them with its own ruins. Though men, therefore, think that the heavens and the earth will be imperishable and are entrusted to eternal safety, yet at times the present influence of danger causes in some degree the sensation of fear; a fear lest the earth, suddenly withdrawn from beneath their feet, should sink down into a gulf, and lest the sum of things, utterly overthrown, should follow it, and only a confused wreck of the world remain. I must now proceed to give a reason why the sea knows no augmentation. In the first place, men wonder that nature does not necessarily enlarge the ocean, into which there is so great a conflux of waters, and into which the rivers run from all quarters. But add to the rivers, if you please, the wandering showers and flying storms, which scatter and discharge themselves over all the sea and the earth. Add, if you please, the sources of the rivers; yet all these, compared with the vastness of the sea, are but as one drop of water for the augmentation of the whole. It is no wonder, therefore, that the mighty ocean is not increased. Besides, the sun, by the influence of his heat, draws a large portion away from it. For we observe how the sun dries with his burning rays garments that are drenched with moisture. But the ocean, we see, is large and widely extended beneath his beams, and although, therefore, the sun may exhale but a small portion of the moisture from each spot on the sea, it will yet deduct a large quantity from its waters throughout so great an extent of surface. Moreover, the winds, I say, which sweep the ocean, may carry off a considerable portion of its liquid, for we often see the roads, after being drenched with rain, dried in a single night, and a crust of mud, which before was soft, hardened and congealed upon them. The clouds, too, I have before shown, take up a large quantity of moisture, which is attracted by them from the vast surface of the ocean, and which they sprinkle, in various parts, over the whole round of the earth, at times when rain falls on the ground, and when the winds drive the clouds athwart the sky. Lastly, since the earth is of a porous consistence, and is in contact with the sea, encompassing the shores of the deep on all sides, the water as it flows from the earth into the sea must likewise pass reciprocally from the salt sea into the earth, for the salt is strained off, and the pure substance of the water flows back into the ground, and collects all together at the sources of rivers, from whence it returns in fresh streams over the earth, wherever a passage once cut has conveyed the flood in its liquid course. I shall now explain what is the cause that fires at times burst forth with such tempestuous fury from the jaws of Mount Aetna. For it was not from any divine origin of calamity that a storm of fire, rising and raging over the fields of the Sicilians, attracted to itself the attention of the neighbouring nations, when, observing all the regions of heaven covered with smoke, and gleaming with flames, they felt their breasts filled with awful anxiety, dreading what new catastrophe nature might design to produce. In contemplating such subjects as these, you must stretch your view widely and deeply, and look far abroad in all directions, that you may remind yourself that the sum of things is vast, and reflect how very small, how infinitely small a part of the whole universe is this one haven, not even so considerable a part as one man is of the whole earth. This point, if you fully consider and fully understand, when it is fairly presented to your mind, you may forbear to wonder at many things which now excite your admiration. For in respect to our own bodies, which of us is surprised if any of his neighbours has contracted a fever that spreads through his frame with a burning heat, or has felt any other painful disease in his limbs? Since the foot often swells on a sudden, a sharp pang frequently seizes the teeth, or darts through the eyes. Erysipelas arises, and creeping through the frame burns whatever part it has attacked, and spreads itself over the limbs. Nor is it strange that such maladies should occur, for there are atoms ready to produce many effects, and this earth and air contain seeds enough of noxious disease, from which an abundance of infinite disorder may have its growth. Thus, too, we must suppose that, as to our own bodies, so to the whole heaven and earth are plentifully supplied all kinds of atoms from the immensity of matter, by the effects of which the earth, being suddenly moved, may quake with agitation, while a rapid hurricane may rush over sea and land, the fire of Aetna may swell forth, and the heaven be in a blaze. For even this happens, even the celestial regions glow with heat. Thus, too, storms of rain arise with a greater combination of force when particles of moisture have in like manner chanced to unite themselves. But the raging fire of Aetna, you will say, is extraordinarily great. Doubtless, I answer, and a river which has been seen by any person appears extraordinarily great to him who has never before seen a greater. And a man or a tree possibly appears large to the eyes of some animals, and every one imagines everything of every sort, which is the greatest that he has seen, to be extremely large, although all things that he beholds, together with the heaven and the earth and the ocean, are as nothing in comparison with the entire sum of the entire whole. I will now, however, explain by what causes the fire of Aetna, when suddenly excited, bursts forth from its vast furnaces. In the first place, the fabric of the mountain is hollow underneath, supported for the most part by arches of flintstone. In all the caverns, moreover, is wind and air, for air, when it is moved by any agitating impulse, becomes wind. When this air, then, has grown hot, and has heated all the rocks and earth round about, as far as it reaches, and elicited from them fire raging with violent flames, it mounts up, and thus expels the blaze straight from the jaws of the mountain, high into the air, and spreads it far abroad, and scatters the embers to a great distance, and rolls forth smoke heavy with thick darkness, while it darts out, at the same time, rocks of a wonderful weight. You cannot therefore doubt but that it is the violent force of air which produces these effects. Besides, the sea for a considerable distance alternately breaks its waves and again retracts its tide at the base of that mountain. From this sea caverns extend underground as far as the ascending jaws of the mountain. By these caverns you must admit, for fact absolutely compels you, that blasts of wind enter and penetrate from the open sea, and thus exalt the flame, and cast up rocks, and raise clouds of sand. For on the summit of the mountains are craters, as the Greek call them, but which we call jaws and mouths. There are some phenomena too, for which it is not sufficient to assign merely one cause, but it is requisite to enumerate many, of which, however, only one can be the true cause. As if, for example, you should see the dead body of a man lying on the ground at a distance, you naturally run over all the probable causes of his death, that the one cause of it may be sure to be mentioned. For neither, perhaps, can you prove that he died by the sword, nor of the effects of cold, nor by disease, nor by poison, but we know that it is something of this destructive nature that has happened to him. This same observation we may make in respect to many other things. The Nile, the river of all Egypt, is the only one of all streams in the world that swells towards summer and inundates the fields. This river waters Egypt from time to time during the middle of the hot season, and this happens, possibly, because the north winds, which are said to be Etesian winds, prevail at that time in the summer over against the mouth of the river, and, blowing up the stream, retard it, and thus, forcing the flood up the channel, fill it, and compel the waters to stagnate. For without doubt these breezes, which come from the cold stars of the North Pole, advance against the stream. The river flows from the warm countries, taking its rise from the extreme south, and from the regions of noonday amidst the races of mankind blackened with scorching heat. It is possible also that a great collection of sand, at times when the sea, excited by the wind, drives the sand within the bed of the river, may cause obstruction at the mouth of the stream to the waters coming towards it. By this means it may happen that the outlet of the river may be less free, and that the current of the water likewise may be rendered less impetuous. It is also possible, perhaps, that rain may fall more abundantly near its source at the very time when the Etesian winds from the north drive all the clouds into those parts. For when the clouds, impelled towards the regions of the south, have collected there in a body, they are at last pressed and driven against the lofty mountains, and compelled by the force of the wind to discharge their waters. Perhaps, too, it may have its increase entirely from the high hills of the Ethiopians, at the time when the sun, shining on all parts of them, forces the white snow, with his dissolving rays, to descend in a flood upon the plains. Give me now your attention, and I will show with what nature and qualities the regions and lakes which are called Avernian are distinguished. In the first place, as to the circumstance that they are named Avernian, that name has been given them from their peculiar property, inasmuch as they are destructive to all kinds of birds, and because when any of the feathered tribe have in their flight come over against those parts, forgetful of their steerage, they relax the sails of their pinions, and, sinking down with powerless neck, fall headlong on the ground, if, perchance, the nature of the parts beneath allow them to fall thus, or into the water, if a lake of Avernus happen to be stretched under them. Such a spot is near Cumae, where the hills smoke from being charged with vivid sulphur, and abounding with hot springs. There is also a place within the walls of Athens, on the very summit of the hill, close by the temple of bountiful Tritonian Pallas, to which the hoarse crows never direct their flight, not even when the altars smoke with offerings. So carefully do they avoid not the violent wrath of Pallas on account of watchfulness, as the poets of the Greek have sung, but the fumes of the sulphur, for the nature of the place produces this effect of itself. There is also reported to be a place in Syria, plainly to be seen, to which, as soon as 4-footed animals have directed their steps, the very nature of it causes them to fall heavily on the earth, as if they were suddenly made a sacrifice to the infernal deities. But all these things are effected by the operation of nature, and the origin of them, and from what causes they arise, is apparent; so that the gate of Tartarus must not be thought to be situate in these regions, nor, moreover, must we imagine that the infernal deities can possibly draw souls down from hence into the coasts of Acheron, as swift stags, with the breath of their nostrils, are often supposed to draw the crawling tribes of serpents from their hiding places. But observe, I pray you, how far all this is at variance with just reasoning, for I now proceed to give you a full explanation concerning this very subject. In the first place, I assert this, which I have also frequently asserted before, that there are in the earth all kinds of forms of the atoms of things, of which there are many that are wholesome for food, and many that may bring on disease and hasten death. We have also previously shown that for different animals with regard to the substance of life, some substances are better adapted than others, on account of their dissimilar natures and opposite constitution one to the other, and the primary figures of their seminal particles. Many noxious atoms pass through the ears, many that are offensive and harsh to the sense penetrate through the nostrils, nor are there few only which are to be avoided by the touch, or shunned by the sight, or which are bitter to the taste. You may notice too how many things are of a violently pernicious influence on mankind, both disagreeable and deadly. To certain trees, we may first observe, has been assigned a poisonous shade, so that they often cause pains in the head if any one lies stretched on the grass beneath them. There is likewise on the high mountains of Helicon a tree which has been known to kill a man by the malignant odour of its blossom. All these destructive substances, you will understand, spring from the ground, because the earth contains many seeds of many things mingled in many ways, and distributes them separately to different productions. And when a night taper, just extinguished, strikes a person's nostrils with a pungent odour, it takes away his senses, so that he falls down on the very spot, as when that disease takes effect which is accustomed to stretch men at full length. And a woman, overcome with the strong scent of castor, if she has smelled it at the time at which she discharges her menses, falls backward, and her elegant work drops from her tender hands. And many other things relax the organs, causing them to languish throughout the body, and disturb the soul in its seat within. Besides, if, with a stomach too full, you even stay long in a warm bath, or are drenched in a layer of tepid water, how easily may it often happen that you may fall down fainting in the middle of it? And how easily does the oppressive vapour and scent of charcoal find an entrance into the brain, unless we have first taken a draught of water? But when it has penetrated through all the well-warmed apartments of a house, the odour of wine then falls like a deadly blow upon the nerves. Do you not observe also that sulphur is produced in the earth itself, and that bitumen, with its offensive smell, forms concretions in it? When, moreover, men seek for veins of silver and gold, searching the hidden depths of the earth with iron instruments, how strong an odour does the mine exhale from beneath? Or have you not learned how much poison is in the earth for gold mines to exhale? What sort of looks and complexions do they produce in the men who work in them? Do you not remark or hear from others in how short a time they are wont to waste away, and how length of life is necessarily withheld from those whom superior power confines in such an employment? The earth, evidently, steams forth all these vapours, and breathes them out into the regions of the air which are open and ready to receive them. So likewise the regions of Avernus must send up from beneath a vapour destructive to birds, a vapour which ascends from the earth into the air, in such abundance as to poison the body of the atmosphere to a certain extent. So that, as soon as a bird has been borne thither on its wings, it is there stopped, being so violently affected by the invisible poison, that it drops down over against the spot where the exhalation raises itself. And when the bird has fallen there, this same force of the exhalation takes away the remains of life from all its members. For at first it only excites, as it were, a certain giddiness in the birds, but afterwards, when they have fallen from on high on the very sources of the poison, it comes to pass that they must there yield up even their life, because a vast quantity of the poisonous exhalation surrounds them. It happens also at times that this vapour and exhalation of Avernus disperses the air which intervenes between the birds and the earth, so that that portion of the atmosphere is left from this cause almost empty, and when the birds in their flight have come over against this part, the effort of their wings immediately halts and grows ineffectual, and every struggle of their pinions on either side is unsupported. Thus, when they are unable to flap their wings or to rest upon them, nature, you will understand, compels them to descend to the earth by their own weight, and accordingly, sinking down through the part which is almost a vacuum, they disperse abroad their lives through every pore of the body. End of section 17.
Section 18 of On the Nature of Things. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa. On the Nature of Things by Lucretius. Translated by John Selby Watson. Section 18. Book 6, Part 3. Water in wells, moreover, grows cooler in summer, and for this reason, that the earth is then rarefied by the heat, and emits rapidly into the air any atoms of warmth which it may happen to contain. The more, accordingly, the earth is exhausted of its heat, the cooler also does the water become, which is concealed underground. And on the contrary, too, when the earth is contracted and condensed and congealed as it were with cold, it happens that, as it contracts, it discharges into the wells whatever heat it contains. Near the temple of Jupiter Ammon there is said to be a fountain which is cold in the day and warm in the night. At the peculiarity of this fountain men greatly wonder, and imagine that the earth is heated in its turn by the power of the sun from beneath during the time when night has covered the earth with its awful darkness, a supposition which is too much opposed to just reasoning. For since the sun, striking on the uncovered body of water at noonday, when the rays from above are possessed of such violent heat, cannot make it warm even on the surface, how can this same sun act upon the water and infuse into it his quickening heat from beneath the earth, which is of so dense and solid a consistence, especially when he can scarce make his warmth by means of his glowing rays penetrate through the walls of houses? What then is the cause? It is evidently this, that certain ground, less dense than the rest of the ground, encircles this fountain, and that there are many atoms of heat near the body of water. Hence, when night covers the earth with its dewy shade, the ground underneath immediately becomes cold and contracts. By this process it happens that the soil, as if it were compressed with the hand, discharges into the fountain whatever atoms of heat it contains, which make the water warm to the touch, as well as the steam of it. Afterwards, when the sun with his morning rays has relaxed and rarefied the earth, as his active heat mingles with it, the atoms of heat return again into their former places, and all the warmth of the water passes into the ground. From this cause the fountain becomes cold in the daytime. Besides, the water is acted upon by the rays of the sun as the day comes on, and is rarefied by the tremulous heat of his beams. It accordingly happens that whatever particles of heat it contains, it disperses, as water often dispels the cold which it contains, and dissolves its ice, and relaxes its fetters. There is also a cold spring at Dodona, over which, when tow is placed, it frequently, catching fire at once, throws out flame, and in like manner a torch lighted at its waters casts a radiance wherever it swims or is impelled by the winds over the surface, the cause evidently being that there are in the water many atoms of heat, and particles of warmth must also arise from the earth itself over all the bottom of the fountain, and be exhaled and passed forth at the same time into the air. Yet these particles must not be so vivid as that the spring can be rendered hot by them. Besides, some powerful influence excites those atoms of heat, when dispersed abroad, to burst suddenly upwards through the water, and to combine on the surface, as in the sea around Abydos there is a spring of fresh water which bubbles up through it, and puts aside the salt waves around it. And in many other places the sea affords a seasonable relief to thirsty mariners, inasmuch as it casts up fresh water among the salt. Thus, too, those atoms of heat may burst up through that fountain of which we have spoken, and diffuse themselves abroad among the tow, which atoms, when they combine together, or adhere to the substance of the tow or torch, easily take fire at once, because tow and torches contain likewise many particles of heat, which may unite with those in the water to produce flame. Do you not observe also that when you hold the wick of a lamp recently extinguished to a night taper, it takes fire before it touches the flame? And have you not noticed a torch catch fire in the like manner? Many other substances too, affected by the mere heat, begin to burn at a distance from a fire before its flame closely involves them. Such, therefore, we must conceive to be the case with respect to that fountain. In the next place, I shall proceed to show by what law of nature it happens that the stone, which the Greeks call a magnet, from the name of the region that produced it, for it was first found in the country of the Magnetes, has the power to attract iron. At this stone men look with astonishment, for it often exhibits a chain of little rings suspended from it, since you may at times see 5 or more, hanging in a straight line, oscillate in a gentle breeze, whilst one depends from another attached to it underneath, and whilst they feel from each other the influence and attraction of the stone, so thoroughly does its force pervade the whole succession of rings. In matters of this kind you must establish many points before you can state the principle of the thing itself, and I must accordingly approach the subject by a long circuit of introductory remarks, on which account I entreat your attentive ear and favourable regard. In the first place, from all bodies, whatsoever we behold, there must necessarily flow and be emitted and dispersed certain substances which strike the eye and excite vision. Odours, too, are perpetually flying off from some bodies, as cold is also diffused from rivers, heat from the sun, spray from the billows of the ocean, which consumes walls near the shore. Nor do various voices cease to flit through the air. Moreover, the moisture, so to speak, of a salt taste comes often into the mouth when we are walking near the sea, and when we look at diluted wormwood being mixed, a bitterness affects our palate. So evident is it that a certain substance is carried off perpetually from all bodies, and is dispersed in all parts round them, nor is there any delay or rest allowed to the efflux, since we constantly perceive it with our senses, and may see all objects at all times, and smell them, and hear them sound. Here I shall observe again that which is set forth in the first part of my poem, namely of how porous a consistence bodies are. For though to understand this is of importance to many subjects, it is especially necessary to establish with regard to the very matter immediately under our notice, concerning which I am proceeding to speak, that there is nothing in the whole of things before us but body intermingled with vacuity. It is apparent, first of all, that in caverns the overhanging rocks exude moisture and distil running drops. From the whole of our bodies also perspiration trickles, our beard springs forth from them, and hairs arise all over our limbs and members. The food which we take is distributed through all our veins, and swells and nourishes the extreme parts of the body, and even the very nails. We feel cold too, and vivid heat penetrate through brass. We feel them likewise pass through gold and silver, when we are holding full cups. Moreover, voices fly through the stone walls of houses. Odours and cold pervade them, as well as the heat of fire, which has power to penetrate even the substance of iron, as is felt where the corselet confines the circuit of the neck. The infection of disease likewise penetrates walls, as it enters into houses from without. Philosophers, too, with reason, send far back again into the depths of heaven and earth the tempest which has burst forth from the earth and the heaven, since they rightly consider that there is no combination of matter, ethereal or terrestrial, which is not of a consistence far from impenetrable to other atoms. To this is to be added that all atoms which are discharged from bodies are not possessed of the same power to affect the senses, nor are they all alike adapted to all substances. The sun, we may first observe, extracts the moisture from the earth and renders it dry, while it melts ice and forces the snows piled on the high mountains to dissolve in the heat of its rays. Wax, too, placed in the warmth of the sun, becomes liquid. Fire, moreover, melts brass and dissolves gold, but contracts and draws together the hides and flesh of animals. Water also hardens iron when fresh from the fire, but softens hides and flesh when hardened with heat. The wild olive tree, than which there is nothing that grows more bitter to the taste of man, delights the bearded goats, as if it were flavoured with nectar and ambrosia. Swine, besides, shrink from ointment of amaracus, and dread every kind of perfume, for that which seems at times to restore us, as it were, to life, is to bristly boars strong poison. But mud, on the contrary, which is to us most repulsive filth, seems clean and attractive to swine, so that they roll themselves over and over in it without being tired. There is this likewise which remains to be noticed, and which seems necessary to be stated before I proceed to speak of the exact subject before us. Since in various bodies are situated many pores, these pores must be distinguished by natures differing from one another, and have respectively their own forms and shapes. For there are various senses in animals, of which each perceives for itself its own peculiar object, since we observe that by one sense sounds penetrate into us, by another taste from the juices of food, by another the smell of perfume. Besides, one thing seems to pass through stone, another through wood, another through gold. One substance seems to penetrate silver, and another glass, for through the latter images seem to pass, and through the former heat. One thing, too, seems to penetrate through the same passages quicker than another. This difference, you may be certain, the nature of the passages obliges to exist, since it evidently varies, as we showed a little above, according to the different consistence and texture of bodies. For which reason, since all these points are established and laid down, and everything prepared and made ready for us, the principle of the magnet will hence, moreover, be easily shown, and the whole cause which attracts the substance of the iron will be made manifest. In the first place, many atoms or effluvia must necessarily fly off from the stone, which, by their impact, disperse the air that is situate betwixt the stone and the iron. When this space is emptied, and a large void is made between them, atoms of the iron, immediately darting forward, rush in a body into the vacuum, and the whole ring of necessity follows, and passes onward with its whole body. For no substance coheres and combines more closely, having its primary elements intimately involved, than the cold and rough consistence of stout iron. It is therefore the less wonderful if, as is stated, certain of its atoms, starting forth in a body from the iron itself, cannot rush into the void without the whole ring following, which it does, and continues to move until it has reached the stone itself, and has become fixed to it by secret attachment. The same process takes place on all sides, and wherever an empty space is formed, whether at the side of the iron or above it, the nearest atoms tend immediately into the void. For they are impelled by impacts from other surrounding atoms, nor can they of themselves rise upwards, or pass away from the magnet into the air. To this is to be added another reason why this motion of the atoms may still more certainly take place, namely, that as soon as the air before the ring has become thinner, and the space between it and the magnet more vacant and open, it immediately happens that the air which is situate at the back of the ring carries it forward, as it were, and impels it from behind. For the air surrounding all bodies continually strikes upon them, but the air that surrounds the iron drives it forward at such times as it approaches the magnet, because the space on one side is empty and receives it into itself. And this air, too, of which I am speaking, subtly conveying itself through the numerous pores of the iron into its small recesses, thrusts and pushes it forward. This substance of the iron, accordingly, is helped forward by this assistance and impulse, as ships and their sails are driven onwards by the wind. All bodies, moreover, must contain air in their substance, since their consistence is more or less porous, and air surrounds and is in contact with everything. This air, then, which is concealed within the iron, is continually agitated with a restless motion, and thus, doubtless, strikes upon the ring, and moves it, as you may conceive, internally. And the whole air, within and without, tends in the same direction in which it has once started, and where it has found a vacuum to assist its efforts. It happens, too, at times, that the substance of the iron recedes from this stone, as if accustomed to start back from it and to follow it by turns. Thus have I seen iron rings of Samothrace, as well as filings of iron, lying in brazen basins, thrown into agitation and start up when the magnet was applied underneath, so that it seems desirous to flee away from the lodestone when the brass is interposed. For it is by the intervention of the brass that so great an aversion is produced, since, as is evident, when the effluvia of the brass have preoccupied and filled up the open pores of the iron, the effluvia of the stone follow, and find all parts of the iron full and have no way to pass through as they would have had before. They are therefore obliged to strike against the substance of the iron, and to drive it upward with their own stream, by which means the magnet repels from itself and drives away through the brass that metal which, without the interference of the brass, it most frequently attracts. But do not wonder, in the consideration of these subjects, that the effluvia from this stone cannot also repel other substances. For some substances remain unmoved as being sustained by their own weight, of which sort is gold, and others cannot be repulsed because they are of a porous consistence, so that the effluvia pass through them unobstructed, of which kind wood appears to be. The substance of iron, however, is placed between these two, so that when it has admitted certain atoms of the brass, it is then possible for the stream of particles from the magnet to impel it. Nor are these mutual affinities of the magnet and iron so unlike the affections of all other substances, but that many instances of the kind occur to me, instances of bodies which I could mention as remarkably adapted to each other. In the first place, you see stones cemented only with lime. Wood is joined together with glue prepared from certain parts of oxen, and with such strength that the veins of boards will open in cracks sooner than the seams of ox glue will relax their fastenings. The juice of the vine is willing to mingle with spring water, while heavy pitch and light olive oil refuse to unite with it. The purple colour of the murex so blends in one body with wool that it can never be extracted from it, not even if you should strive to restore the wool to its whiteness with all the waves of the sea, not even if the whole ocean with all its floods should be disposed to cleanse it. Moreover, one substance only couples gold with gold, and brass is united with brass only by pewter. How many other facts of this nature is it possible to produce? But to what purpose would it be? Neither are such long digressions necessary for you, nor does it become me to bestow so much labour on this one subject, but it is proper for me to comprise many matters in brief space, and in few words. To conclude, then, respecting the magnet, between those bodies whose textures so mutually correspond that the cavities of this answer to the prominences of that, and the cavities of that to the prominences of this, the best union is evidently formed. It is possible also, we may observe, that some bodies may be held united as if with rings and hooks, a mode of union which seems to take place, rather than any other, between the lodestone and iron. I shall now explain what is the nature and origin of diseases, and how a morbid infection of the air suddenly arising may spread deadly destruction among the race of mankind and the tribes of inferior animals. In the first place, I have already shown that there are in many substances atoms which tend to preserve our life, and on the other hand, many must necessarily fly abroad which are productive of disease and death. And when these have by chance combined and disordered the air when in this state consequently becomes unwholesome. and all this prevalence and pestilentialness of diseases arise either from without the earth, as clouds and mists gather in the heaven above us, or spring, as frequently happens, from the earth itself, when, drenched with immoderate and untimely rains, and acted upon by fierce rays of the sun, it has contracted a kind of putrescence. Do you not observe also how those who visit any place far from their country and their home are affected by the change in the air and water? And this happens because the substances in those elements greatly differ. For how much must we suppose that the air of the Britons varies from that which is in Egypt, where the north pole of the world fails to show itself? Or how much must we imagine that that which hangs over Pontus differs from that which stretches over Cadiz, and towards the races of men blackened by the parching heat of the sun? These 4 kinds of air which we observe to proceed from the 4 winds and 4 several quarters of the heaven we know to be different one from another, and the complexion and looks of the men also appear to differ widely, and peculiar diseases seem to affect each individual nation. There is the disease called leprosy, which has its rise on the river Nile in the middle of Egypt, and in no other country. In Attica the feet are affected with the gout, and in the country of Achaia the eyes are afflicted with soreness. Hence various regions are unfavourable to various parts and members, and this effect the difference of the air produces. When that air, therefore, which to us is strong poison, puts itself in motion, and an unwholesome atmosphere begins to spread, it creeps along by degrees like a mist or cloud, and disorders the whole heaven wherever it advances, and compels it to alter its nature. It happens accordingly that when this corrupt air has at length joined our air, it infects it, and renders it like itself, and unsuitable for us. This new malady and pest, therefore, either suddenly falls into the water, or penetrates into the very corn, or into other food of men and cattle. Or even, as may be the case, the infection remains suspended in the air itself. And when, as we breathe, we inhale the air mingled with it, we must necessarily absorb those seeds of disease into our body. By a similar process, a pestilence often spreads among oxen, and contagion among dull sheep. Nor does it make any difference whether we go into climates that are unfavourable to us, and change the atmosphere around us ourselves, or whether nature of her own accord brings upon us corrupt air, or any other affection which we are not accustomed to experience, and which, at its first approach, may infect us with disease. Such a cause of disease, and such deadly vapour in the atmosphere, formerly rendered the fields poisonous throughout the territories of Attica. It both dispeopled the roads, and exhausted the city of its inhabitants. For, having its rise in remote parts, proceeding from the coasts of Egypt, and having passed through a long tract of air, and over the liquid plains of the sea, it at length descended on the people of Pandion, and all were then consigned by troops to disease and death. They first found the head burning with heat, and the eyes red with an extraordinary brilliancy shed over them. The jaws also, which looked black within, exuded blood, and the passage of the voice was clogged and obstructed with ulcers. The tongue, the interpreter of the mind, was covered with drops of gore, and was enfeebled by the disease, slow in its motion, and rough to the touch. Then, when the pestilential influence, descending through the jaws, had filled the chest and gathered in the suffering stomach of the patients, all the defences of life at once gave way. The breath sent forth a fetid odour from the mouth, such as putrid carcasses cast out upon the earth emit. The powers of the whole mind and the whole body grew languid, as if on the very threshold of death. On these intolerable sufferings was perpetually attendant an anxious distress of mind, and complaints mingled with moanings. A retching, too, frequently occurring both by night and by day, convulsed the nerves from time to time, and, contracting the limbs, rendered the sufferers powerless, exhausting those who were already wearied out with pain. Yet you could not perceive the surface of the body of any one externally inflamed with any extraordinary degree of heat, but rather offering a sensation of gentle warmth to the hand. At the same time, however, all the body looked red with ulcers, as if it were burning in it, as it appears when the erysipelas spreads over the limbs. But the internal part of the patient was glowing with heat that penetrated even into the bones. A fire raged in the stomach as in a furnace, so that you could have rendered no garment, however light and thin, of use to the person of any one. They constantly exposed their limbs, burning with the disease, to the wind and the cold, and some threw themselves into cool rivers, precipitating their bodies naked into the waters. Many, approaching the brink with open mouths, hurled themselves headlong down into the water in wells, for a parching thirst, raging insatiably, and driving them to plunge their bodies into the flood, made vast showers seem only as small drops. Nor was there any intermission of the malady. The bodies of men lay exhausted. Medicine spoke in low tones with a secret dread. So incessantly did the patients roll their eyes, which remained wide open, burning with disease, and unvisited by sleep. Many other signs of death at the same time showed themselves. The mind was distracted with anguish and dread. The brow was gloomy, the look wild and fierce, the ears disturbed and filled with noises. The breathing was either fast or thick, or drawn but seldom. There was a moist dew of perspiration shining upon the neck. The saliva was thin, scanty, and tinged with the colour of saffron. It was also salt, and expelled with difficulty from the hoarse throat by coughing. In the hand the nerves contracted, and the whole arm shook. From the feet a coldness rose quickly yet gradually over the body. The nostrils towards the closing hour of life were compressed. The point of the nose was sharp. The eyes were hollow, the temples sunk, the skin cold and hard, a distortion overspreading the mouth, the forehead tense and prominent, and not long after these appearances the limbs lay stretched in rigid death, and for the most part, when the 8th light of the sun shone, or at farthest at his 9th rising, they yielded up their life. Of which sufferers, if any one for a time escaped death, as was possible either by reason of the foul ulcers breaking, or by means of a black discharge from the intestines, yet consumption and destruction awaited him at last, or, as was often the case, an excessive flux of corrupt blood, attended with violent pains in the head, issued from the obstructed nostrils, and by this outlet the whole strength and substance of the man passed away. He, moreover, who had escaped this violent flux of foul blood, was not certain wholly to recover, for still the disease was ready to pass into his nerves and joints, and into the very genial organs of the body. And of those who suffered thus, some, fearing the gates of death, continued to live, though deprived by the steel of the virile part, and some, though without hands and feet, and though they had lost their eyes, yet persisted to remain in life, so strong a dread of death had taken possession of them. Upon some, too, came forgetfulness of all things, so that they knew not even themselves. And though numerous corpses, heaped upon corpses, lay extended over the ground, yet the tribes of birds and of wild beasts either ran off to a distance to avoid the repulsive stench, or, after having tasted the flesh, sickened with instant death. But, indeed, during those days scarcely any bird appeared in the sky, nor did the destructive tribes of savage beasts leave the woods during the nights. Most of them suffered from the disease and died. The faithful spirit of the dog especially, stretched along all the streets, unwillingly relinquished life. The force of the disease, however, wrested the vital power from his limbs. Funerals, unattended and solitary, were eagerly hurried over. nor was there any certain mode of cure common and efficient for all. For that which had secured to one the privilege of breathing the vital air and of beholding the regions of the sky was mere poison to others, and hastened their death. But that which in these circumstances was preeminently deplorable and wretched was that when any one found himself seized with the pestilence, he lay down as if he were condemned to death, sunk in spirit and with a despairing heart, thinking only of death, and gave up the ghost on the same spot on which he fell. At no time, however, did the contagion of the insatiable disease cease to spread itself from one man to another, as a murrain is disseminated among woolly sheep and horned cattle. And this circumstance, even above all others, heaped death upon death. For on those who shrunk from visiting their sick friends, fatal neglect soon took vengeance, as having been too fond of life and too apprehensive of death, causing them to perish by a squalid and miserable end, deserted by their relatives, and destitute of relief. But those who had been ready to give assistance fell into the malady from infection, and by reason of the duty which shame and the moving entreaties of the sufferers, mingled with sounds of reproach, compelled them to undergo. The most excellent characters, accordingly, incurred this kind of death most frequently. Those, moreover, who strove to bury the multitude of their dead one after another, returned home overcome with weeping and mourning. Hence men were stretched on their beds in great numbers through sorrow and despondency, nor could any one be found whom, in such time of calamity, neither disease, nor death, nor mourning for the loss of friends had affected. Besides, as the pestilence now spread, every shepherd and herdsman, as well as every stout driver of the crooked plough, languished under the infection. Their bodies lay cooped up within their narrow huts, consigned to death from the effects of want and disease. You might have seen the dead corpses of parents stretched on their dead children, and sometimes, again, children expiring on the bodies of their mothers and fathers. And this affliction was brought in no small portion into the city from the country, affliction which a sick and infected multitude of rustics, flocking together from all parts, introduced. They crowded all places of reception and of shelter, for which reason, as they were thus crammed together, death the more easily strewed them in heaps by the force of contagion. Many bodies, from the effects of thirst, lay stretched at the public conduits, prostrate and extended along the road, their breath having been stopped by too great indulgence in the deliciousness of the water. And everywhere along the open and public roads you might have seen powerless limbs with half-dead bodies of men, horrible with squalor, covered with rags and perishing for want of dressing. There was skin only on the bones, which was itself now almost sunk away by reason of disease of the viscera and overspreading filth. All the sacred temples of the gods, moreover, death had now crowded with carcasses. All the shrines of the divinities in every part stood filled with corpses, for these were places which the attendants of the temples had thronged with strangers. Nor, indeed, was the worship of the gods or their divinities much regarded, for present suffering overcame religious considerations. Nor was the custom of sepulture, with which that pious people had always been accustomed to bury, observed longer in the city. For the whole people, in perturbation, ran hither and thither, and each in his sorrow buried his friend according to his means. Dire poverty, too, with sudden impulse, prompted men to many impious deeds, for they placed their relatives with loud outcries on the funeral piles raised for others, and applied torches to them, often even quarrelling with great bloodshed, rather than the bodies should be left unconsumed. Thus abruptly ends the description of the plague and the poem of Lucretius. Much of the account of the pestilence, as is observed above, is taken from Thucydides, I have not thought it necessary to transcribe in the notes the passages of Thucydides which Lucretius imitates. The English reader may refer to the whole description in Mr. Dale's Thucydides, and the scholar has ample references in Lambinus and Creech. Procopius has given a full account of the plague which began to spread through the world and devastated the city of Constantinople in the reign of Justinian, an account in which Gibbon says that he has emulated the skill and diligence of Thucydides in his description of the plague at Athens. It is observable that he represents it, like that of Athens, as taking its rise from Egypt. Ethiopia and Egypt, says Gibbon, chapter 43, sub fin, have been stigmatized in every age as the great source and seminary of the plague. In a damp, hot, stagnating air, this African fever is generated from the putrefaction of animal substances, and especially from the swarms of locusts, not less destructive to mankind in their death than in their lives. The assertion of Macrobius, Saturnalia 6.2, that Virgil took the principal colouring and features of his description of a pestilence among cattle, Georgics 3, 478-566, from Lucretius's picture of the Athenian plague, rests on very slight foundation. Virgil may have been induced to write his description in emulation of that of Lucretius, but very little that is actually copied will be found in it. In Ovid's description of the same Athenian pestilence, Metamorphoses 7, 523-613, the attentive reader will find far more marks of imitation. Silius Italicus, 14, 580-617, also, like his great predecessors, gives a description of the plague which attacked the Roman army at the siege of Syracuse. Many of his points are taken from Lucretius, as in the following passage. Helpless the victims sunk, the tongue was parched, cold perspiration o'er the trembling frame flowed copious, while the tumid throat forbade the food's half-forced descent. A vehement cough shook the vexed lungs, and from the arid mouth fumed fiery breath that ceaseless thirst proclaimed. The eyes, that scarce the oppressive light could bear, sunk in deep ghastly hollows by the side of the sharp nose. Foul bile commixed with blood forth gushes from the stomach. The weak limbs, fleshless and wasted, shrink to skin and bone. The general features of pestilential destruction are also carefully detailed by Seneca in his Oedipus, Act 1. Thomson has a passage on the effects of pestilence, Summer, verse 1026 and following. Boccaccio, in his description of the plague at Florence, seems to have had Thucydides in view. If the reader wish to see more accounts of pestilence in imaginative writers, he may consult Defoe's History of the Plague, Wilson's City of the Plague, Brockden Brown's Arthur Mervyn, Horace Smith's Brambletie House, Mrs. Shelley's Last Man, Ainsworth's Old St. Paul's. End of section 18. End of On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, translated by John Selby Watson.